Chapter 1806. Zhang Yan could feel that the qi in this thing was not pure. If this thing was truly perfect, then he would not even be able to sense it. In other words, something that had truly reached this level would not exist in front of him, even if he could not see it. As long as there were traces to follow, he could eventually come into contact with it. The reason why he could not do it now was because he had not found the right method. Moreover, he also noticed a detail. Just now, the reason why he felt like he could not do anything had nothing to do with this thing. Instead, it was because there was an external force that was so weak that it was almost impossible to detect that was hindering him. Logically speaking, Bushutian did not have any changes in his emotions. Moreover, he had already merged with the heavens here, so it was impossible for him to reject him. Thus, the abnormality here was most likely due to the person behind him. He could not help but think that the other party should have occupied this thing first. If he wanted to find the law of fate, then he would have to compete with this person for the right to control this thing. As long as he could drive this person out, he might be able to achieve his goal. On the surface, it seemed that the other party was definitely stronger than him since he could borrow the power of this thing. Thus, there seemed to be no hope of winning, but in reality, this was not the case. Judging from the previous confrontations, the other party was not a cultivator, but a remnant essence incarnation of a powerful cultivator in the past. Perhaps this person had once explored the depths of Bushutian, so after his death, he borrowed the Willy here to continue living. However, even if this person could use Bushutian's Willy to deal with him, it was impossible for him to continuously attack, because in order to do this, he first had to have a certain degree of power. No matter what state the other party was in, even if it was a true Yang cultivator who had come back to life, it would be impossible for the other party to surpass him in terms of magic power and Yuan Qi. Thus, as long as he could maintain his own strength, the longer he persisted, the greater his chances of winning would be. However, there was one thing he had to worry about. In the beginning, this person was deliberately stiff, but gradually became more flexible. He had a few guesses about this, but he still needed to verify them. He decided to use the simplest method first, and that was to visualize this thing in the divine will. Anything that a true Yang cultivator could think of could be reflected into the present world and turned into reality if they wanted to. Only things that were beyond one's level could not be done just now. However, for these things, one could understand the mysteries within and use them to improve one's Tao. However, there was one thing to note. Because there was the power of the person behind this, he needed to distinguish it. If he accepted it, not only would he be disturbed, but he might also go on the wrong path. Others could not help here, so he could only rely on his Tao and cultivation to distinguish and judge. After making this decision, he concentrated and tried to visualize it. 6 years had passed in the void primordial sea. Within the reverse world, Qi Yao and the other two awakened from their deepest recesses. In the beginning, they were only a strand of consciousness, but as they returned to the modern world, their bodies were reconstructed. In an instant, they stood in the void again. Heng Jing sensed that there were no enemies spying on them, so he relaxed a little and asked, "Demon Lord Qi Yao, what should I do next? Should I defend against the human Tao invasion, or should I continue to suppress the Khanate demon land?" Even though he'd been killed this time, he didn't lose confidence like Deng Zhang because of his undying nature, and he didn't even dare to fight the human Tao battle anymore. Qi Yao did not answer immediately. He looked around and realized that the Khanate demons had given up most of the heaven worlds that they had originally occupied. Their disciples had all left. Other than the mystical Kong world, there were only a few heaven worlds left. However, those places had been deeply infected by the roots. There were very few living beings and they could be completely ignored. Bai Wei's action was obviously a concession. If he wanted to attack again, he would have to destroy the mystical Kong realm completely. This actually had more disadvantages than advantages. If a Xinjiang Yuanzun who gave up everything really wanted to make things difficult for you, it would be very difficult to deal with him. They did not have Zhang Yan's ability to kill people of the same generation in an instant. He thought for a while and said, "Let's stop for now. In this situation, we should be friends and not enemies." It was hard to know what the human Dao Yuanzun would do next. If he had the intention to destroy them, then Bai Wei and Deng Zhang were allies that could be won over. Heng Jing saw his worries and said, Demon Lord Qiao, if we fight with the human Tao again, they will at most send me to the void of heaven and earth to be reborn. What is there to be afraid of? Qiao shook his head and said, it's not that simple. The human Tao has Busu Tian and endless treasures in the Kunshu continent. If they are willing to spend the effort, it is not difficult to refine some treasures to suppress us. Heng Jing wanted to say that these treasures usually needed a long time to be refined. To reach the level of suppressing them, it would take at least thousands or even tens of thousands of years. He was not afraid now. However, when the words were at the tip of his tongue, he could not say them. Because he suddenly thought that it was not impossible. Zhang Yan had obviously mastered a secret technique that could allow him to quickly recover his magic power. If this person had refined such a treasure, he could have waited for tens of thousands of years without any hesitation, then it wouldn't have been long before he could take it out. Thinking of the consequences, he felt a chill in his heart. He said, in the human Tao, that priest Zhang is the most powerful. I wonder how we can fight against him. Qiao said in a low voice, of course there is a way. If Tai can be used by us, then no one in the world can be my opponent. Ling Su said directly, this is very difficult. There is almost no hope of success. Heng Jing asked again, other than this, is there any other way? Qiao sighed and said, that is to find the Khanate cardinal treasure that has fallen on the Kun beginning continent in this era. As long as we can find it and try to subdue it, we will be able to obtain it. Heng Jing and Ling Su sighed when they heard this. This method was also difficult, and it might not be easier than the first one. The human Dao Yuanzun could enter and leave the Kunshu continent at will, but they did not have the ability to do so. In the end, they would find the treasure. As long as the human Dao sensed it, they would be able to seize it. Qiao said, as long as there is a glimmer of hope, it is worth a try. As the three were talking, they suddenly felt something. They looked up and saw a flash of golden light. A golden-robed Taoist appeared in front of them. Qiao cupped his hands and said, Taoist wouldn't come to me for no reason. Please tell me why you are here. Taoist returned the greeting. He chuckled and said, fine, I will be frank. I will not hide it from you. I am here to form an alliance between the three clans. 3 clans forming an alliance? Qiao smiled and said disapprovingly, the last time the Dingwu alliance attacked the human Dao, our 3 clans joined forces, but they were still repelled, and 2 fellow Taoists even died. Is there really a need for such a thing? Taoist priest Daoi's expression turned serious as he said, of course there is. The more the situation is like this, the more we should work together. I'm not talking nonsense. If the 3 sects don't work together now, are we just waiting to be defeated by the people Dao? Qiao pondered for a moment and said, we can agree to this condition, but there is one condition. Taoist priest Daoi became spirited and said, please speak. Qiao said, I need Heavenly Lord Broad Victory's disciples to gather some precious materials for me on the Kunshu continent. Taoist priest Daoi was puzzled and asked, what do you want these things for? The extraterritorial devils usually used inexplicable items from the reverse heaven and earth for their cultivation. Even when they communicated with each other using their divine wills, there was a sense of incompatibility. Moreover, these items and spiritual vigor could be said to be incompatible. On the other hand, most of the precious materials on the Kunshu continent were nurtured by spiritual vigor. As soon as they got close to them, they would probably be spoiled. Even if they obtained them, it would be useless. Qiao said indifferently, that's our business. They had ordered their disciples to investigate in advance. It was not that all precious materials could not be brought close to them. Some special spiritual items could even be brought into the reverse heaven and earth to continue to be nurtured. However, he did not need to explain anything to them. Taoist priest Daoi did not continue to ask and said, this is not a difficult matter. I can convince Heavenly Lord Broad Victory. Qiao said, when the first batch of precious materials arrives, it will be the time for us to make the agreement. Taoist priest Dowie agreed. His goal here had been achieved. He still had to convince Deng Zhang, so he did not stay any longer. After apologizing a few words, he turned around and left. Jing Heng said, "Demon Lord Qi Yao, are you going to use these precious materials to refine a Taoist treasure?" Qi Yao said, "This is only one of the reasons. Although we lost this time, we also learned the shortcomings that we had neglected before. Demon Lords, you should be able to see that these Yuan Zun in the present world, although their mana is similar to mine, their cultivation base is far better than ours." Heng Jing and Lan Su both nodded. When Zhang Yan attacked them, even though they didn't have any strength to resist, they still tried to use the techniques that they had deduced to dodge. However, it was proven to be useless in the end. On the contrary, the innate demons and heartless Taoists were able to fight back before they were killed. At least, they were not defeated in the first round. Qi Yao said solemnly, "We need to complete our own Taoist techniques as soon as possible. We also need our own treasures, otherwise, we will not be able to fight against the Yuan Zun in the present world." Heng Jing sighed and said, "This is very difficult." Even before the innate demons created the superior scripture, they had also studied under the human Tao. If they were to rely on their own understanding and deduction, it would take a long time. Lan Su then said, "What if we ask Demon Lord Qi Zhou for advice?" Qi Yao could not help but frown. Every time he faced this demon lord, he always felt uneasy. Therefore, he instinctively wanted to stay away from this demon lord. Lan Su said faintly, "Even if Demon Lord Qi Yao does not use Demon Lord Qi Zhou's Taoist techniques, he can still ask him for advice. In order to improve his Taoist techniques, the Yuan Zun in the present world would exchange and verify with each other. So, why would he keep Demon Lord Qi Zhou out?" Qi Yao was silent for a moment before he slowly said, "Demon Lord Lan Su's words make sense. After some time, I will visit this Demon Lord again." As the three of them were discussing, suddenly, Qi Yao was shocked because he realized that many scenes of the future suddenly appeared in front of him. However, they were all fragmented and could not be seen clearly. Even so, he was still shocked by what he saw. He could not help but ask, "Demon Lords, have you seen it?" Heng Jing and Lan Su nodded their heads. However, there were still traces of shock on their faces. Qi Yao said solemnly, "If that is the case, it might be an opportunity." Chapter 1807. Kunshe Continent, Changqi Mountain. Jun Wuqi was sitting peacefully in one of the temples, teaching a few children how to circulate their qi. After receiving the order from Taoist priest Dowie, he established a sect on this mountain. Because he had taught the disciples of the drumming tribe in Daling Mountain, he had a special preference for disciples of the human body. These disciples were found from various tribes of the human path. They were originally born with defects and were abandoned by their tribes and parents when they were young. After he picked up these children, he used his mana to reattach their limbs, open their spiritual acupoints, and finally passed on the method of immortality. Although these disciples were young, most of them had experienced the fickleness of human nature, so they all cherished the opportunity in front of them. Ever since they entered the sect, they all practiced hard. No one was lazy. In just a few years, the structure of the sect had begun to change. At this moment, footsteps were heard, and a middle-aged cultivator came in. He saw Jun Wuqi teaching the children in a gentle and kind voice. He remembered that he was like this in the past, and he couldn't help but smile. After stopping outside for a moment, he came up and bowed respectfully. "Qi Shang greets Master." When Jun Wuqi saw him, he also showed a smile and said, "Disciple, sit down and talk." His disciple was originally from the drumming tribe. When he heard that Jun Wuqi was leaving, he volunteered to follow him. Almost everything on this mountain was arranged by him, so he could be considered as the most capable person. Qi Shang hurriedly said, "There is no seat in front of Master." As he said this, he bowed again. "This disciple has come to ask Master about something." Jun Wuqi said in a gentle tone, "Speak." Qi Shang said, "Master, recently a different tribe has migrated to the foot of the mountain. The young master of that tribe has repeatedly come to ask me to be his disciple. I see that he is sincere and talented, so I want to take him as my disciple. Master, do you agree? Jun Wuchi said, with your cultivation, you can already accept disciples. You can do these things as you see fit. There is no need to ask me. As he spoke, his expression suddenly changed. Qi Shang couldn't help but show concern. Master? Jun Wuchi took a breath, waved his hand, and said, you can leave first. Qi Shang had never seen him like this before. He knew that something must have happened, so he didn't dare to ask any more questions. He bowed again, then called the children over and left together. In Jun Wuchi's consciousness, there was a golden-robed Taoist standing there and asking him, how are things on your end now? Jun Wuchi carefully replied, my lord, everything is fine. Taoist priest Doi asked curiously, oh? Haven't you been surrounded by human path cultivators? Jun Wuchi replied, perhaps it's because I'm careful in my work. Ever since I established my sect under the orders of my lord, no human path cultivators have come to make things difficult for me. Previously, the almighties of the three families had shed all pretense of cordiality and attacked Bushutian. That was because there were too many outer Dao cultivators on the continent and they were hunted down by the human Dao cultivators. However, he was not affected at all. There was actually a reason for this. He had never done anything harmful to the human Dao, and with Taoist priest Daoi's Weili cover, he had long been out of the sight of the human Dao. In addition, there were only a few hundred disciples in his sect, and most of them were not high in cultivation. Therefore, he was not implicated this time and was still living peacefully. Taoist priest Daoi was slightly surprised. He originally thought that Jun Wuchi was so incompetent and had never accomplished anything, so he must have been hiding from place to place. He didn't expect that he would have a stable foothold. He was pleasantly surprised and said, very good. I have something for you to do. Jun Wuchi hurriedly said, my lord, please tell me. Taoist priest Daoi said, the first thing is still the matter of the innate cardinal treasure. You can't give up looking for it. The second thing is to expand the power of the sect as much as possible so that we can compete for the Zhouhuan Yuan Jade in the future. He believed that since they could not fight against the human Dao openly for the time being, they could only start from this aspect. After the Yuan Jade entered the world, the almighties of True Yang would not be able to intervene. However, they must first ensure that there were chess pieces on the continent, otherwise they would not be able to participate at all. Jun Wuchi hesitated for a moment and said, yes, I will do my best. Taoist priest Daoi said, there's no need to clash with the human Dao for now. Try to be more cautious in your actions. After giving these instructions, he disappeared without a trace. Jun Wuchi sighed. The longer he stayed in the lower worlds, the more he craved a comfortable life. He only wanted to live a peaceful life and was unwilling to do such things. However, he was created by Taoist priest Daoi, so it was impossible for him to go against his will. Otherwise, Taoist priest Daoi would only need to take back the Weili, and he would be erased from the world unless there was an almighty who was willing to protect him. However, this was just a thought. It was possible that just now, such a move would be noticed by Taoist priest Daoi first. Of the two things that Taoist priest Daoi had instructed him to do, the first was to expand the power of the sect. However, he felt that there was no hope of finding the innate cardinal treasure. This was because he realized that the human Dao had long given up on the pursuit of the treasure. It was either they couldn't find it, or they had already found the whereabouts of the treasure. He felt that the latter was more likely. Zhang Yan immersed himself in the deep visualization of the cloth. After an unknown period of time, the object finally revealed its true nature, and the external qi that was mixed up with it gradually became clear in his eyes. It was like a flaw entrenched in a warm and beautiful jade, which made people instinctively reject it. However, at this moment, the two were entangled together as if they were inseparable. If he wanted to see the Weili obtained from the place of creation, he had to first drive out the external qi. To do this, he needed to pour his own qi into it and compete with it. He didn't hesitate, slowly circulating his energy and sending it in. Soon, he found that the qi was extremely firm, as if it was deeply rooted. He originally wanted to try to use this to see through the other party, but it seemed to be elusive. He could clearly touch it, but it was not here. It gave him the feeling that it was not something that should exist in this world. This caused him to be even more cautious. He was not greedy for success and was only pushing forward bit by bit. After an unknown period of time, he'd finally completely eliminated all of the auras. The place of creation seemed to have recovered its original appearance, and not a single flaw could be found. At this moment, a feeling suddenly arose in his heart. As long as he fused with this object, then he would immediately be able to control its power, and it would even be easy for him to enter the third level. However, he did not take action for a long time. This did not seem to be a problem, but he felt that it was slightly inappropriate. He, Dan E, and the other two performed the heaven simulation and entered the cloth. In reality, it was only to comply with the general trend of the human Tao so that they could better cultivate here, and they could still come and go freely without any interference. However, if he fused with this object, then would this object be the master, or would he be the master? Moreover, the most crucial point was that the will he contained within this object was above his own. If he took the initiative to fuse with it, then once there was a change, not only would everything be out of his control, even he himself would sink into it. Once this thought arose, he did not continue and instead began to ponder. After a long time, his eyes flashed. Not only did he not go forward, but he also retracted the qi that was supposed to fill in the place of the creation. With that, a change occurred to the fortune. It suddenly became blurry, as if it would disappear at any moment. However, he smiled instead. This should be the true appearance of the beast just now. If he hadn't seen all of this and rashly matched it, then it would be a deviation in his understanding of it. It would definitely cause a great conflict, and at that time, he might even end up dying. It could be said that this was the plot of the mastermind from the very beginning. First, he lured his qi in, then repeatedly fought with it. Finally, he retreated as if he could not win. The real intention was to hide the truth and then borrow the power of Busu Tian to kill him. If it was someone else, after obtaining complete victory, they might not have been able to wait to fuse with this object. At that time, they would have fallen into the plot. He originally wanted to continue visualizing, but he seemed to have overlooked something. After thinking about it, he retreated. When his consciousness returned to the present world, he found that only an instant had passed in the outside world. However, just like when he used his spirit to calculate, his Yuan Qi and Fa Li were greatly damaged. His expression was slightly solemn. This was not a big deal. Even comprehending the mysteries could damage one's Yuan Qi, let alone visualizing this object. However, the key was that he did not know what was happening. He did not even sense it at all. This was very serious. This meant that when he was comprehending, he had almost completely lost his sense of his body. Fortunately, it was him. If it was someone else, if they were to sink a little deeper, all their mana and vitality would be used up, and they wouldn't even know it. If that was really the case, then he would never be able to return to the present world. This was because the transfer of divine will and thoughts required the support of the Yuan Qi Dharma body. If one did not want to die here, perhaps one could only choose to merge with that thing in the end. He narrowed his eyes. This was the second trap set by the person behind him. It could be said that every step here was dangerous and impossible to guard against. If one was not careful, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. Fortunately, it was not that he did not gain anything. After this visualization, he felt that his dharmic path had improved. This was equivalent to constantly communicating with a person whose cultivation might even be higher than his own, and at the same time, repeatedly fighting. If he could ensure that he did not lose himself, then the more tricks the other party revealed, the more he could benefit from it. Thinking of this, he could not help but ponder. The previous difficulty in front of him was how to solve the problem of Yuan Qi consumption. Even if his Fa Li and Yuan Qi were vigorous, if he was immersed in visualization for too long, or if he was too focused on understanding the Xian theory, there was still a possibility that he would lose himself. At present, because after the spirit and the avatar separated, everything happened in an instant. There was no way to prepare in advance. Even if there was a person of the same generation to protect him, it was useless. Thus, he could only rely on himself. After thinking for a while, he came up with an idea. That was to constantly use Bu Su Tian's Weili to kill his past while he was visualizing. This way, regardless of whether he could see his avatar or not, he could still maintain his Yuan Qi. However, this was likely to cause the changes in the heavenly secrets to become more intense. As long as he could understand the third level of true Yang, he believed that all of this could be solved. After making this decision, he immediately changed his mind and held on to this method. His Fa Li immediately returned to its peak, and then he looked into the depths of Bu Su Tian again. Chapter 1808. Zhang Yan continued to observe the place where the essence of creation was gathered. Because there was no more qi activity, it had already returned to its original state. It became clear and bright, and it seemed to exist but not exist. He needed to concentrate to observe it, and if he was slightly distracted, it would seem to disappear from his senses. As for what was visualized in the original divine will, because it was on a fork in the road, he had to find a way to correct it. But if he spent so much effort to change it, it would be better to disperse it. But once he started again, it would mean that all his previous efforts would be in vain. There was nothing to be regretful about. There was no absolute truth in the world, and a cultivator's knowledge would constantly change along with the improvement of his Tao. If he discovered a flaw after visualizing it this time, or if he had a further understanding, he would still overturn it without hesitation if there was a need. He was not only here to seek the truth, but also to fight with an invisible opponent. The battle here was 100 times more dangerous than the battle in the outside world, and the slightest mistake would probably cause him to be trapped here forever. There was no such thing as luck here. After visualizing again, as he immersed himself in it for a long time, he felt that this thing gradually became clearer. At this moment, a feeling arose in his heart, as if he could already abandon what was before him and go to an even deeper and wider place below, and use this to pry into even more profound truths. But he was not moved at all, and still persisted in this. During the process of visualizing, he did not encounter any more obstacles, as if the person behind him had completely disappeared. He did not let his guard down because of this. Every time he visualized for a period of time, he would withdraw from it, organize his thoughts, and observe the outside world to see if there were any unknown changes. But other than the fact that the secrets of heaven were even more confusing, everything else was as usual. But when he withdrew to observe one time, he suddenly noticed that there was a faint trace of change in the entire world. His expression changed slightly, and he could not help but look towards a certain boundary. This is, in the past, the Tao opened up the great heavens and merged it into the cloth. In this endless world, it should be the highest level, but in the jade book that was passed down in the past, it was said that there was a heaven above the great heavens. All the mighty figures could only vaguely sense it. Since the beginning of the records, no one had truly seen this place. However, just now, this feeling seemed to have become slightly clearer. At his level, it didn't matter how long or short it was. As long as he could sense it, he would naturally be able to see everything clearly. Unless there was the interference of a Weili that was on the same level or even beyond him. He tried to observe it again, but it was the same as before. He could only vaguely sense it. He couldn't help but ponder. Just now, such a change must mean that something unknown had happened in the present world. It was just that the mysteries of heaven were concealed, so he couldn't deduce the specific results. Perhaps this was another trick of the mastermind, but he was not afraid of this person. The more it was like this, the more it proved that he was walking on the right path. Therefore, he was going to use this method just now to interfere. His mind spun, and he put down the thought of pursuing it. At this moment, it wasn't suitable for him to be distracted and investigate, otherwise, he would only be led away by the other party. So long as he was able to seek the true Tao, all of this wouldn't be a problem. Kunshe Continent. Han Dingyi, a disciple of the Blue Feather Pavilion, was riding a mysterious beam of light through the deep ravines, searching for spirit medicines and precious materials that could be found on the cliffs. Nowadays, many sects in the mountain and sea realm gathered precious materials from the lower realms for their cultivation purposes. However, this was not an easy task. After all, the Kunsher continent was filled with wild beasts, and without a powerful cultivator to oversee things, it would be difficult to advance. Fortunately, the Blue Feather Pavilion was a subsidiary sect of the Qinsang school, so there was no need to worry about such matters. For example, the area he was currently traveling in had long since been swept clean by the almighty cultivators of the Qinsang school. As for the outsiders and demons with low cultivation bases, the Blue Feather Pavilion could deal with them on its own. As he flew along, he suddenly caught sight of a crevice in the cliffs. At first, there were many of them, so he hadn't paid much attention to them. But then, he saw a flicker of spiritual light, which seemed to contain some sort of treasure. Heart-thumping, he placed a talisman into the crevice. After confirming that there was nothing out of the ordinary, he felt a bit more at ease. Activating his magic, he entered the crevice. At first, it was very narrow, but the deeper he went, the wider it became, as if there were other worlds inside. He guessed that he had reached some unexplored area. Although excited, he was also on guard. He held a protective talisman in his hand, and if he sensed that something was off, he would immediately fly out to summon the senior members of the sect or a cultivator from a higher sect to investigate. After flying for the time it took to burn a stick of incense, there was light in front of him, and he knew that he had reached the exit. He moved forward slowly, and when he took the last step, his vision opened up, and what appeared in front of him was a mudflat. As he arrived, a large flock of birds were startled. He looked for a moment and suddenly thought of something. He turned his head, and there was no cliff behind him, but a blue sea. The horizon was vast, and under the blue sky, the reef island near the shore was faintly discernible. He was shocked and tried to sense it, but he couldn't feel any spiritual vigor, as if it was a place with no spiritual vigor. He looked around and pondered, could it be that I'm in a small world? Or a cave left behind by an almighty cultivator? Although he had never been to such a place, he had heard about it from the masters in the sect, so he didn't panic. He took out a talisman, and this talisman was given by the Qinsang school. As long as it was still in Bushu Tian, any disciple could use it to return to the altar of the upper sect. However, there was no reaction from the talisman when he circulated his spell power. He paused for a moment, and then guessed that this was an illusion. It wasn't impossible. Thus, he took out a barrier-breaking pill from his sleeve that his master had requested from the Yutsang sect and swallowed it. After circulating his power to dissolve the pill, he opened his eyes and found that nothing had changed in the world. This could more or less prove that everything in front of him was real. He couldn't help but rub his eyebrows. He couldn't tell where this place was. However, although he couldn't return to where he came from, he wasn't in a rush. He was the grandson of the sect master, Han Xiaoda, and he had been sent to the clear darkness heavenly lake to cultivate since he was young. The sect wouldn't give up on him, and if the others found out that he was missing, it wouldn't be hard for them to find the crack in the cliff. Therefore, he felt that there was still hope for him to return. The sky was high and the sea was wide, so he might as well take a look first. Therefore, he took out the beast-subduing collar and threw it out. A green hawk flew out, and he stepped on its back and flew into the sky. He was only at the mystic light realm, so the sect wouldn't give him too powerful a bird. Therefore, he could only use this bird as a means of transportation and wouldn't be able to help him in battle. After walking for half a day, he saw a large ship in the distant sky, cleaving through the waves as it approached. As soon as he saw this object, he understood that there were intelligent life forms here. However, he didn't expose himself. Instead, he used a technique to conceal himself and carefully sized up the large boat. This ship didn't have any sails or oars, and it was pulled by 32 horses. These beings were strong and had a layer of fine blue scales on their bodies, and they galloped on the surface of the ocean as if they were flying. He stared intently. When he was in Bushutian, there were all kinds of strange and ferocious creatures, and he was already used to it. It was just that he was born in Bu Pavilion, and because of his skills and preferences, it was inevitable that he would pay special attention to these creatures that were born with extraordinary talents. Only after a while did he move his gaze away. He saw that there were 30 large crossbows on each side of the boat. The arrows on the crossbows were over 20 feet long. They looked dark and shiny, and there was a bloody smell coming from them. These crossbows were used to deal with some kind of large monster. There were people walking around on the deck, and their appearances weren't much different from a living person. Regardless of whether they were male or female, they were all dressed very well. Although some of the servants weren't very colorful, they were very detailed. Maybe it was because of the different customs, but some of the women were very bold and revealed their white shoulders and arms, which made him frown unconsciously. After listening for a while, he realized that the people on the boat were all talking in a strange language. Thus, he took out a small mirror and shone it at them before sticking it to his forehead. In an instant, he understood what they were talking about. After listening for a while, he also seemed to be thinking about something. As he was observing, all of a sudden, the waves under the ship separated without warning, and a giant monster that looked like a leech suddenly jumped out of the water. Just its exposed limbs were more than 10 yards tall, and it swallowed a small half of the galloping horse in front of it. The people on the ship immediately shouted. After a while, there was a sound of breaking air, and the sharp crossbow arrows were shot out. The giant monster's body was quickly covered with arrows, and some of them even pierced through its body. There was a thick blue liquid that looked like blood flowing out, but these injuries didn't seem to cause much damage to the monster. Han Dingy observed from the side, and found that perhaps because there was no spiritual opportunity, the giant monster was just a little bigger in size, and it didn't have any supernatural power. It was still a mortal body, and it was actually not difficult to deal with. He thought for a while, and felt that this might be an opportunity to communicate with the people on the ship. With a turn of his mana, a ray of light swept across, and with just a roll, the upper body of the ferocious beast was instantly melted. The people on the ship saw this and were momentarily stunned. Han Dingy patted the green hawk, and slowly landed on the ship. At this moment, the people on the ship looked at him with fear and respect. A handsome man in his 30s, who was dressed luxuriously, walked out and bowed to him. He said carefully, "Thank you for your help, may I know how to address you?" Han Dingy got down from the back of the green hawk, and he didn't want to say too much, so he just casually said a few words to deal with it. The man didn't dare to ask more, and seeing that he didn't seem to have the intention to leave, he was both happy and fearful, so he deliberately gave up his cabin for him to stay. For the next few days, Han Dingy communicated with this person, and just now, he understood that it seemed that because of the lack of spiritual opportunity, there were no cultivators in this world. Instead, it was all about bloodline. Those with noble bloodline could perform all kinds of mysterious powers, and even become like strange monsters. Those with weak bloodline could also plant blood that was extracted from various ferocious beasts or even gods and monsters, and they could also have such abilities. However, compared to the former, their potential was lacking. The reason why the people on the ship were so afraid of him was because, on the surface, he seemed to be one of the few people who had the bloodline of gods and monsters. Such people usually came from the bloodline clans, and they were not people that people like them could associate with. However, what shocked him was that, from the words of this person, it seemed that some of the people with noble bloodline could display power that was no less than some of the cultivators in the upper state. He felt that this world was not as simple as he thought, and he thought to himself, these people are limited by their own situation, and they don't know much. They seem to be going to a sect to ask for blood, and I'll go with them to see if I can find out more. When I have the chance, I'll go back and thank the sect. Chapter 1809. Han Dingy sat in a simple yet elegant room, reading a scroll in detail. He was wrapped in a gorgeous feather cloak, and on his wrist was a long, round string of vermilion jade. On the black wooden table beside him, there was a green teapot with a dragon's kiss on it. Smoke was coming out of the spout of the teapot, and when it reached the top, it gathered into a 3-feet-long auspicious cloud, adding an ethereal atmosphere. In the blink of an eye, he had been here for more than a year. Whether it was his attire or his habits of speech, he was no different from the people of this world. Of course, he did this deliberately to blend into this world. That day, he came to this place called Yuluo High City with the big ship. Just now, he knew that this place was under the jurisdiction of a sect called Li Ming Blood Sect. The scale of this sect was not small. There were 6 countries and 85 states under its rule, and it had over 1 million disciples. It could be considered a colossus. Every spring, it would bestow a batch of blood seeds to be planted by the disciples of the great clans who had yet to awaken their bloodlines. The member of the Tan clan he'd saved was from such a great clan. Perhaps it was because he'd saved their lives, or perhaps it was because of their reverence towards the so-called bloodline he possessed, but the Tan clan treated him rather courteously. Not only had they gifted him a manor, they'd even sent many servants and beautiful maidservants to serve him. He did not refuse and accepted all of them. During this period of time, he had been observing and understanding this world through them. Now, by combining some ancient legends and scattered records, he just now knew that the land under his feet was called Xiong Land. There were about 10 similar places in this world. However, this was not the whole world. According to the legends, this world was like a grain of star sand, and outside the sky, there were countless star sand swirling. When everything gathered together, it was called Wanke Star Current. When he first learned about it, he was also secretly surprised. If these records and legends were true, then it seemed that he had arrived at a place that was not inferior to the void primordial sea. He secretly made up his mind that he must find a way to figure this out so that he could report in detail to the sect when he returned in the future. This was not without reason. It seemed that in the void world, there were frequent attacks, and the weak could be swallowed by outsiders at any time. He believed that since he could come here, there might be a day when the people here could also come to his side. After all, there were also some powerful experts here, so he couldn't let his guard down. However, in the past year, no one had come to look for him, which made him wonder if he was the only one who could pass through the crack in the cliff. However, he had not given up hope. Perhaps Biu Xian was powerless, but if he asked for help from the Qinsang school, there might be a way. Especially since he was cultivating in the clear nether heavenly lake, because of his relationship as a descendant of Han Zuocheng, he had a good relationship with his fellow disciples. He believed that they would definitely do everything they could to find him. At that time, as long as he could ask for help from an almighty being, he would definitely be able to find some clues. Unfortunately, he was an outsider and was naturally not trusted. If he wanted to further understand this, he would have to join a sect. However, there was a prerequisite. Just as he was thinking, someone suddenly knocked on the door. He asked, "Who's outside?" A servant's voice came from outside. "Mr. Han, young Master Tan has just now sent someone over to say that he has caught a pearl girl from the sea and wants to invite Mr. to tame her." Han Dingy thought for a while and said, "Go tell the messenger that I'll be there in a moment." On the great stone platform of Sea City. This place was located on the cliff of Broken Sea. It was built with large stones and the ground was polished and smooth. It could accommodate 10,000 people. At this moment, there were more than 100 people here, and they were clustered around 2 young men. They were all in high spirits and wore luxurious clothes. The one on the left was the landlord of this place, young Master Tan Imo of the Tan clan. The person standing opposite him was called Song Kansas. He was from the Song clan of Jinhai City, which was also a bloodline descendant clan that was not inferior to the Tan clan. At this moment, the people standing on both sides were pointing at a smooth and white shell lying on the ground. Qin Imo said with a smile, "When Mr. Han comes here, it won't be difficult for this pearl girl to tame her. This pearl girl has always had a fiery temper, and not many people can tame her. If young master can bring her to the sect, you'll definitely make those people in the Edge Sea jealous." Song Kan snorted and said, "Those people showed off a few scarlet hyena horses to me last month. Now that I've brought the pearl girl back, I'll see what they have to compete with me." At this point, he was slightly worried and couldn't help but ask, "Can that Mr. Han really do it?" Qin Imo said with a smile, "This Mr. Han is not simple. Young Master Song, don't worry." Out of curiosity, Song Kan asked around. When he heard that the Tan clan not only gifted him a manor, but also provided him with blood medicine every month, he couldn't help but be surprised. This person only has a bloodline that can tame strange beasts. It's not difficult to find a similar bloodline descendant. Why would the Tan clan value him so much? Chi Nemo said with a smile, "Young Master Song, don't underestimate this person." He slightly lowered his voice and said, "My father once said that this person is very likely to have dual meridians." That day, he easily took care of the leech dragon. Song Kan's expression changed and he said in shock, "Dual meridians?" He also stopped joking and exclaimed, "If that's really the case, then his background is not simple." Did you find out which higher clan this person comes from? People like them all had neo-demon bloodlines. Although the power of their bloodlines had all kinds of abilities, and it was impossible to know them all in a lifetime, they were usually derived from the same bloodline. However, there were some people who had 2 or more bloodlines, and the potential they possessed was not something that ordinary bloodline descendants could compare to. However, most of these people came from higher families, and they might even be descendants of the royal family. They were definitely different from local clans like them, where the source of their bloodline usually came from the gods and monsters. Chi Nemo shook his head and said, "The sea and land are boundless, and there are countless different bloodlines. A few years ago, the white monsters invaded and destroyed too many bloodline descendants. How can we find out?" Song Kan still wanted to say something, but at this moment, a servant came to reporting to young master, "Mr. Han has arrived." Chi Nemo hurriedly said, "Yes." Not long after, Song Kan saw a handsome man dressed in a woven cloak approaching. He did not look around and nodded at Chi Nemo, saying, "Young Master Chin." Chi Nemo put on a smile and raised his hand in greeting, saying, "Mr. Han, I have to trouble you with another matter today." Han Dingy glanced at the shell on the ground and said, "It's a small matter." He did not have the bloodline to tame strange beasts, but he had the technique passed down by Biu Xian. These strange beasts did not have spiritual vigor, and were almost defenseless against his mana. He could easily subdue them. He stretched out his hand and touched the surface of the shell. A ray of spiritual light dripped into water, and instantly rippled. At the same time, he grabbed it, as if he had grabbed something. After a while, a small gap appeared on the shell, and it slowly opened again. A petite girl with delicate facial features stood up, looking at everyone with a timid gaze. Song Kan's eyes lit up, and he leaned forward, saying, "It's really done." The girl seemed to be frightened, and she hid again, closing the shell tightly. Song Kan was stunned. Chi Nemo could not help but look at Han Dingy. Han Dingy calmly said, "Don't worry, it's just that this pearl lady is timid." He opened his palm, where a drop of blood was swirling. Whoever holds this item, the pearl lady will recognize that person as her master. But remember, this creature is timid and weak. If the master does something against her will, it's very possible that she will commit suicide. You must be careful. Chi Nemo immediately acknowledged and smiled, "Thank you for your help, mister. Please wait for a while, I have something to discuss with you later." He asked for the blood pearl and handed it to Song Kansas. After sending him off, he returned and invited Han Dingy to a manor to watch a dance. He then used the lively atmosphere to tell Han Dingy the purpose of his visit. It turned out that the Song family had the intention to marry him. Han Dingy did not agree immediately, and only said that he would consider it. After Chi Nemo said that, he did not mention the matter again. When the banquet ended, Han Dingy sat in the Tan family's carriage and returned to his residence. However, he was thinking about this matter on the way. In fact, after his reputation of being able to tame exotic beasts had spread far and wide, there were quite a few bloodline descendants who wanted to form a marriage alliance with him. He had also seriously considered this matter. If he could form a marriage alliance here, then he would be able to better blend in here, and it would also be more convenient for him to travel around and understand this world. However, there were also disadvantages to this. As an outsider, he had no foundation and was tied to a clan. More importantly, he also learned that every descendant of a large clan would have a bloodline inheritance jade plate. The disc described the origin of their clan, as well as the various clans that their ancestors had been married to. If he had agreed to the Tan family, he would have had to take this out to prove his status. However, he did not have such a thing, and it would be exposed. What was more troublesome was that in this world, this thing was engraved in everyone's bloodline, and it was impossible to forget. Even if the original item was destroyed, it could be written down again at any time. Therefore, it was impossible to fake it. Even if it was fake, it would be extremely difficult. Normally, the descendants of large bloodline clans could not appear out of nowhere. Moreover, they would definitely marry other clans. When the time came, they would only need to check if there were any similar records of their in-laws, and they would immediately know if what they said was true or false. At first, he also wanted to fake a bloodline that no one knew and make up a set of bloodline records. However, it was very difficult to do so, because if the appraiser saw a familiar bloodline, he would usually only check a few generations. However, if it was a completely unfamiliar bloodline, he would have to trace it back to his ancestors and present it to the royal upper clan. If they still could not understand it, then they would continue to present it to the Li Ming blood sect. It should be known that bloodline inheritance was not chaotic and disorderly. Instead, there were certain rules that could be found. Even if he really came from a foreign land, it was impossible for him to escape such changes. If he randomly made up a story, the people of Daoren would be able to see through it at a glance. Because of this, he decided to take a risk and borrow an item that had been passed down from his great ancestor. He tried to make something plausible. If he failed, he would leave this place and find another place to settle down. Chapter 18:10. Han Dingyi took out a few spell formation flags and placed them around him. Because he had no Earthstring spiritual opportunity to borrow, he could only pour his own magic power into them. Thankfully, it didn't take long. Once the restriction was set up to isolate the inside from the outside, he took out a porcelain bottle. He waved his hand, and a clump of quintessence blood appeared. This was Flood Dragon blood, which had been painstakingly refined by Han Zhucheng before he was reincarnated. You could say that he had used everything he had learned in his life to acquire this item. It was rumored that the Yao Yin sect leader, Wei Zihong, the Clear Feather sect leader, Tao Zhenhong, the Spirit Returning sect leader, Shendong, and a few unknown almighties had all contributed to the process. There had been over 100 drops of this item, and because he was one of the more outstanding descendants of the Han clan, he had 1 drop in his possession. Furthermore, he had refined it with his own quintessence blood since he was a child, so it had long since fused with him. If anyone else got their hands on it, it would be useless. Once he consumed the quintessence blood, he would be able to transform into a flood dragon, and would be able to use all of its divine abilities and abilities. If he didn't want to use it, he could simply spit it back out. The miraculous thing about it was that, if the master could carefully refine it, the power of the quintessence blood would continue to increase. It could also absorb the divine abilities and abilities of other living beings. It was essentially a magical item. Because in this world, even monsters had bloodline inheritances, and the boundary between humans and monsters was not clear, his plan was to refine this item into his body, and then fuse it with a creature in this world and engrave this bloodline. As long as the bloodline legacies followed certain rules, they could not be created out of thin air. That was why he had no choice but to do it this way. As for whether or not anyone would recognize him, he didn't need to worry about that. If anything went wrong, he could simply leave. The power he had just displayed wasn't worth the effort of anyone in this world. Furthermore, he had been holding back a bit. He had always flown on a green hawk, although he could actually use a mysterious beam of light to escape. Other than the true bloodlines of the godly creatures, few people in this world could fly as they pleased. Therefore, if he wanted to leave, no one would be able to stop him. His only worry was that the flood dragon blood essence had come from the mountain and sea realm, and he wasn't sure if it would be able to fuse with the bloodlines of the living beings in the mountain and sea realm. With a wave of his hand, a large glass basin appeared from afar. There was a fish swimming in it, and it was only the size of a child's palm. Its entire body was transparent, and there was a short horn on its head. This was a jewel fish. Even though it was rare and precious, most people only used it for fun. However, it was rumored that it was also a type of dragon, and after Han Dingyi studied it, he found that it was indeed true. Moreover, he was certain that there were real dragons in this world. It was also because of this that he had such confidence. He followed the incantation and pointed his finger. The exquisite fish suddenly lost its vitality and all of its blood flew out. In an instant, it gathered into a drop of blood and converged into the flood dragon blood essence. Immediately, the blood essence began to boil and tumble. At this stage, if he were to fuse with a dragon bloodline that was too powerful, not only would it not be successful, it might even cause a huge commotion, but this exquisite fish was just the right choice. After a while, the blood essence gradually turned into a pale gold color. It calmed down and quietly floated there. Han Dingyi's heart relaxed, knowing that he had succeeded. Without hesitation, he opened his mouth and swallowed the blood essence. He had never seen the form of the vein-passing jade plate before. However, after merging with the glass fish's bloodline, he studied it a little. Naturally, there were many things that he didn't know before, but he felt that this was an ability that he was born with. He forced out his own blood, and then, following some kind of impulse, he wrote many curved words on the jade disc that he had prepared in advance. He recognized these words, which were dragon language. Ordinary people might not be able to recognize them, but if a dragon saw them, they would be able to. This was actually better, as it would be easier for him to deceive the beast appraisers. After doing all this, he felt that he had consumed a lot of his magic power. Thus, he took out a jade box from his sleeve and opened the lid of the box. On top of the embroidered handkerchief, there was a walnut-sized crystal jade shaped like an amber. This was what people in this world called the jade sand seed. It had the effect of warming up one's mind and gathering one's energy. However, if one consumed too much of it, one would be contaminated by the impurities in it. If one did not know how to neutralize the impurities, there was a high chance that one would become addicted to it. However, this item was indispensable to him. Because there was no spiritual opportunity in this world, just now, when he came here, he relied on consuming medicinal pills to maintain his mana. However, medicinal pills would eventually run out one day, so he had been looking for other ways. In the end, he found this item. This item was actually condensed from spiritual essence. With a little bit of sacrificial refining, it could replace the use of medicinal pills. Taking this item out, he refined it in the cauldron for a while before turning it into smoke. Then, he slowly absorbed it into his body's acupuncture points. After a while, the mana that he lost was replenished. With a thought, he put away the formation flags in the surroundings and placed the jade disc into the brocade box. Then, he called for an attendant who was waiting outside the door and pointed at the object. "Take this object to young Master Qin. He should know what I mean." The attendant carefully stepped forward to take it, bowed, and then retreated. Han Dingyi stood up and looked at the dazzling lights outside. If he wanted to understand everything about this world, he would need to join a large sect. However, if he was not from a large bloodline clan, he would not be able to join such a sect unless he was recommended by a large clan. After the marriage with the Tan family, he would be recommended by the Tan family and enter the blood sect. Not only would he achieve his original goal, but he could also use this opportunity to obtain more jade sand seeds. It was killing two birds with one stone. In the Tan family's manner, Tan Imo soon received the jade plate that Han Dingyi sent over. He immediately understood that Han Dingyi had agreed to the marriage and was overjoyed. However, first, he had to confirm the source of Han Dingyi's bloodline before he could decide how to treat him. He immediately ordered, "Invite appraiser Yun here." Soon, a sturdy old man strode in with his head held high. He bowed and said, "Greetings, young master." Tan Imo greeted him politely and said, "Elder Yun, take a look at this bloodline inheritance jade plate." Elder Yun nodded calmly. He knew that since Tan Imo had invited him here in the middle of the night, the bloodline evaluation wouldn't be simple. However, when he picked it up, he was still shocked. "This is," Tan Imo asked anxiously, "how is it?" Elder Yun put down the jade plate and said, "Young master, forgive me for asking, but may I know whose bloodline jade plate this is?" Tan Mo's expression changed. "Is there a problem?" Elder Yun said solemnly, looking at the bloodline, "This person's mother is likely a dragon lady." "What? Dragon lady?" Tan Mo's eyes widened in shock. Usually, upper race royalty was descended from deities and monsters, and there were many descendants of dragons as well. However, a dragon lady could only be a descendant of a true dragon. In other words, if one traced Han Dingyi's mother's lineage, she might be a true dragon. Tan Mo couldn't help but feel excited. "Is it possible to confirm it?" Elder Yun said with certainty, "With this dragon text as proof, it's definitely true. However, due to my limited knowledge, I can't identify the specific bloodline of a dragon, so I didn't dare to do so. Otherwise, I might anger that dragon god. Young master, it's best if you send this to the Li Ming blood sect." Tan Mo took a deep breath as he calculated the pros and cons in his mind. At first, he thought that Han Dingyi had dual bloodlines, but now, it seemed like he was a dragon descendant. However, his value was much higher, so he couldn't decide how to treat the latter. Elder Yun looked at him and advised, "Actually, young master, you don't have to be too surprised. Bloodline is bloodline, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be enlightened." Tan Mo calmed down and slapped the table. "That's reasonable. Once a dragon descendant was enlightened, their power and abilities were not small. However, very few people could do it because the refining process required a vast amount of blood medicine. Their race couldn't afford it. Only by sending him to the Li Ming blood sect would he have a future. Since that was the case, he didn't have to stop him. He now admired his foresight. As long as Han Dingyi married into the race, he would be able to keep this extremely valuable bloodline in the race. He thought for a moment before summoning a trusted aide. "Send 100 portions of blood ointment to Mr. Han's residence." That trusted aide jumped in fright and said, 100 portions? Blood ointment could increase the power of a bloodline descendant's bloodline. Normally, 1 portion could be used for 30 to 40 days. 100 portions could be used for 10 years. Tan Mo said with certainty, "Yes, 100 portions. Just do as I say." He knocked on the table and said, "Tell Mr. Han that I will recommend him to the Li Ming blood sect." The aide could only obey the order and leave uneasily. As for Han Dingyi, he quickly received the news. Knowing that he didn't get exposed, he relaxed and waited. About half a month later, the recommendation letter submitted by the Tan clan was approved by the Li Ming blood sect. Han Dingyi then packed his things and set out on a boat with Tan Mo. They left Yuluo High City and galloped towards the sect's mountain gate. Kunsher Continent. At the place where Han Dingyi disappeared, a Taoist in his 30s with a solemn expression was standing in the air. There were dragons circling around him. Behind him stood a few Daorin respectfully. This was the Blue Feather Pavilion's leader, Han Xiaoda. Whether it was aptitude or temperament, he was far better than his father, Han Zuocheng. He was the only one among the many lower sects of Qinsang school to achieve grotto heaven. After Han Dingyi disappeared, the disciples of the sect couldn't find his whereabouts no matter how hard they tried. Only then did Han Xiaoda personally come to check. After careful inspection, he found that Han Dingyi's last breath dissipated here. However, there was only a mountain wall on the other side, and the sky above it was empty without anything. Even if one looked into the mountain, they would only see ordinary rocks. After some calculations, he found that the situation was very unusual. Han Dingyi didn't seem to have been kidnapped by some demon or monster. Instead, he seemed to have entered a grotto heaven small world. He pondered for a long time. If it was really as he guessed, it might be an arrangement made by a powerful senior. It wasn't something that Blue Feather Pavilion could handle. He said to the elders behind him, "This matter isn't simple. I will go to see Exalted Xian Shao later to see if she can come forward. You all stay here and guard this place. Don't let anyone destroy this place." All the elders nodded in agreement. After Han Xiaoda gave his instructions, he turned into a ray of clear light and went to the White Radiance Mountain estate. Not long after, he arrived at the boundary. He bowed and said, "Is Exalted Xian Shao here?" "I, Han Xiaoda, would like to see Exalted Xian Shao." After a while, he heard a beautiful and pleasant voice. "So it's Martial Nephew Han. Martial Nephew, come in and talk." Chapter 18:11. In Xian Yuantian heaven, Zhang Yan was sitting in the palace while his mind was immersed in the depths of Bushutian. He had been visualizing the essence of creation for an unknown amount of time. If it was in the present world, perhaps tens of thousands of years had passed. However, it was like entering the true Yang realm. No matter how much time had passed inside, only a moment had passed outside. If he had not been on guard against unexpected changes and had withdrawn from the depths of Bushutian from time to investigate, perhaps he would have succeeded in the blink of an eye. At this moment, he once again exited from his meditative state. Then, he turned his gaze around and observed the various worlds to see if there were any unusual changes outside. At this time, he suddenly sensed something and found that it was the divine will of his eldest disciple, Lu Yenny. Knowing that something had happened, he immediately entered the unknown. Lu Yenny saw him and bowed, saying, "Disciple pays respect to master." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Disciple need not be so polite. Why have you come to find master? Is there a problem in the sect?" Lu Yenny said, "There is indeed a strange matter." She came down and explained in detail what Han Xiaoda had reported to her and said, "Disciple has tried to investigate, but there seems to be an external force obstructing it. I feel that this matter is not simple, so I came to report to master." After listening, Zhang Yan calculated the time in his heart. The day Han Dingyi disappeared was the day he noticed the change in Bushutian. He thought for a moment and said, "This is not a small matter. You don't need to intervene, master will deal with it." Lu Yenny said, "Disciple understands." After Zhang Yan withdrew from the divine will, he immediately looked over and found that it was indeed as Lu Yenny had said. There was a bit of resistance here, but it was not very strong. Thinking about it, he suddenly had some guesses. Very soon, he saw Han Dingyi walking into a crack. His gaze immediately followed Han Dingyi, but in the end, Han Dingyi turned into a flash of white light and disappeared. His eyes flashed slightly. This situation clearly showed that Han Dingyi had gone to another domain, and this door was most likely the work of someone of the same generation. This was not something that could be solved by sending a doppelganger. Yang Kai pondered for a moment. Right now, he was trying to find a way to enter the third stage of the true Yang star, so he had no time to deal with it, but that also meant he couldn't do anything about it. Over the past few days, he had gained a deeper understanding of how to use the Weili within the nature creation heaven's essence by visualizing it. At this moment, Bushutian seemed to become one with him. At the same time, he raised his hand and pointed at Han Dingyi's shadow. Han Dingyi's figure flickered and something seemed to appear on his body, but it also seemed like nothing had changed. Generally speaking, the future was endless, and the past was the only thing. Therefore, the shadow of the past could not be changed, because if one denied it, it would be the same as denying oneself. But in reality, there were other changes. If a person went to a place that had no karma with the present world, there might be a different result. This time, he was only making an attempt to see if he could deliver an item to her side. If he succeeded, he should be able to help this junior, and at the same time, he would be able to confirm one of his guesses. If he failed, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, if Han Dingyi could return to Busa-Tian in the future, then everything related to this would disappear, leaving no trace in the modern world. Mount Guanyue in Xionglu. The bright moon was reflected in the lake, and it was quiet and peaceful. A bamboo raft sailed across the water, and on it stood a woman in plain clothes. Under the moonlight, she looked pure and untainted, as if she had come out of a painting. Qin Imo looked slightly nervous and said, "Brother-in-law, this is the sect's raft. I will bid you farewell here." This time, the person Han Dingyi was going to marry was his younger sister. Although the marriage was set, according to the customs of the big clans, they still had to wait for 1 to 3 years. This was because people in this world could only give birth to children after awakening their bloodline. Just now, they would have a greater chance of inheriting their parents' bloodline. If they gave birth to a mortal, it would be disadvantageous to the parents and the clan. Of course, there was also a consideration that could not be mentioned. If Han Dingy did not awaken his bloodline, then there might be a change in this matter. Han Dingy said, "Brother-in-law, farewell." Just as Chi Nemo was about to move away, he thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "Remember what I said before? The royal family is high and mighty, and all of them are descendants of deities and monsters. Although brother-in-law is not bad, before awakening his bloodline, you must not have any conflict with them." Han Dingy said, "Brother-in-law, rest assured. I am not a troublemaker." This matter was mentioned more than once along the way. In fact, he also knew that the person reminded him repeatedly because he was afraid that he would implicate the Tan family if he was careless. Chi Nemo nodded and reached out to pat his shoulder. He took another look at the woman and left in a hurry. The woman came closer and said, "Junior Marshal brother, please board the raft. There is still a long way ahead, and we must return to the sect before dawn." Although her voice sounded gentle and beautiful, it was cold and devoid of any emotion. Han Dingy boarded the raft and asked, "Why before dawn? Is it the sect's rule?" The woman said expressionlessly, "We are below Choshui, and we are at the mouth of the Cho district. The Cho district is a deity and monster. It has two bellies, one leading to the nether light and the other leading to the Li Ming realm. If we do not arrive before dawn, we will be swallowed by it and sent to the nether world to fight with the countless ghosts and monsters that it swallowed in the past. We will never be free until the day of eternal death." Han Dingy's expression did not change, but he laughed in his heart. He was not an ignorant person, and he had seen many powerful cultivators before. A deity might be able to intimidate these natives, but he did not care at all. This didn't mean that his strength could compare to this monster, and it was instead because he'd seen an even vaster world, and he knew that there were even greater mighty forces that existed above this world. It was even to the extent that he felt that if he continued to cultivate step by step, then he might be able to possess such might in the future as well. When he thought like this, he naturally didn't have that reverence in his heart. However, he did not expect that the Li Ming blood sect was actually in the belly of the deity. No wonder it could not be found outside, it should be in a place similar to the heavenly abode. After traveling for an unknown period of time, the sky gradually brightened. The woman in white tapped the pole lightly, and a circle of ripples suddenly appeared on the surface of the water. Then, it expanded and covered the two's vision. When they looked again, they found that the raft had disappeared. The place where the two were standing was extremely high, and their field of vision was abnormally wide. At this moment, what entered their eyes was a big city that was brightly lit. Tall towers stood in great numbers, and the bright light extended all the way to the mountains on both sides. There were countless scattered lights, and there were also lanterns swaying in the air. The scene was extremely magnificent and gorgeous. Han Dingy was slightly dazed. He looked around and estimated that at least hundreds of millions of people could live in this place. The scale was really not small. At this moment, a kite with a centipede was flying in front of them. Each centipede was carrying a basket, and each basket could accommodate about 2 people to sit on. At this moment, there were about 1,000 people on the centipede. At the forefront, there was a fiery red lantern leading the way. There was a wooden bracket on top of it, and a 7 or 8-year-old girl with 2 buns of hair was sitting on it. She should be the person driving this thing. She looked very lively, and her 2 short legs kept swinging there. The woman in white said, "Junior brother, you can go up." Seeing a rope hanging down from above, Han Dingy nodded to the woman, and went forward to grab it. He floated up, and when he looked back, the woman had already disappeared. He frowned, and after a moment, he had already landed in a basket. There was an honest-looking young man sitting there. At this moment, he stood up and cupped his hands at him. He said, "I am Duan Yukong. May I know your name, brother?" Han Dingy returned the greeting. Tan Clan's Han Dingy. Now, he could be considered to be one with the Tan clan. The people in this world extremely valued bloodline, so he should borrow the name of the Tan clan when he should. If he only reported his surname, it would instead attract unnecessary trouble. And those who could be here were all of similar status. If it was the royal family or the bloodline of the gods and monsters, they definitely wouldn't use this method to enter. As expected, when Duan Yukong heard this, he instantly became much more enthusiastic. So you're a disciple of the Tan clan. Sorry for not recognizing you. Duan Yukong himself was attached to the bloodline of the Ling clan. Their backgrounds were similar, so they quickly became familiar with each other. The two of them chatted for a while, and Duan Yukong asked, "Brother, what property are you planning to buy?" Han Dingyi smiled. "I haven't decided yet. Coming here, the sect wouldn't let you learn profound skills for free. Not only would you have to pay a monthly fee for your residence, you would also have to pay a certain price for every bloodline secret. So if every disciple wanted to cultivate, they would first have to buy property and make a living here. The more profits they made, the faster they would cultivate. If the profits were small, they might not even be able to pay the fees. It would be difficult to survive here, let alone do anything else." Fortunately, the new disciples had the sect's arrangements for their shops and houses, and they could even be exempted from fees for 3 months. During this time, the disciples could slowly familiarize themselves with the sect. But if they still couldn't make a name for themselves after 3 months, the sect wouldn't give them any face, and everything would be taken back. Tan Imo had told him all this before, but he already had plans. When he had been cultivating at the clear nether heavenly lake, he had also learned some alchemy and artifact forging techniques. The method of refining blood medicine here was extremely brilliant, but it was lacking in other aspects, so he could use this as a starting point. Duan Yukong kindly advised, "We only have 3 months, Brother Han should make a decision as soon as possible." Han Dingyi smiled and thanked him. Not long after, the centipede kite arrived in front of a tall building that stretched for several miles. On the side of the building, there was a long bamboo corridor. It was very wide, and there was a row of black-clothed people standing on it. They had long bamboo hooks in their hands, hooking the centipede and slowly pulling it closer. Duan Yukong glanced at it, stood up, and said, "Brother Han, this is where I will be staying, so I will bid farewell to Brother Han here. 3 days from now, the elders of the sect will announce the rules of the sect, and we will meet again at that time." Han Dingyi thought for a moment, then took out a bottle of pills that he had refined in advance from his sleeve and handed it to the other person. "These are some pills that can boost one's spirit. I refined them myself, and since we are fated to meet today, I will give them to Brother Duan." Duan Yukong accepted it readily. It was normal for disciples of large clans to give gifts to each other. He said that he would treat him in the future, then cupped his hands and followed the rope down to the platform, quickly disappearing into the crowd. At this moment, Han Dingyi revealed a strange expression. Just now, when he took out the pills, he discovered that there was an extra page of the golden book in his sleeve, and the only thing that could be placed here could be the one that had been brought from the Kunshir continent that day, but he didn't remember having this thing. He thought about it again, but he couldn't think of anything else, so he could only put it down for now, preparing to check it after he settled down. Chapter 18:12. The centipede kite left the corridor and flew for another hour before arriving at the residence that the Tan clan had prepared for Han Dingyi. It was a 5-story building, and of course, he wasn't the only one living here. There were also a dozen Tan clan disciples who had been arranged to stay here. When he arrived, a steward came out to greet him, accompanied by servants. Han Dingyi's residence was the highest. After walking around, he saw that in addition to the necessary living quarters, there was also a reception pavilion, a tea house, and a loft. Everything was exquisite and beautiful, and the paintings on the walls were the work of famous artists. Outside the window, a warm breeze blew in, and from time to time, a fragrant aroma wafted in. It was a leisurely and comfortable atmosphere. Looking downstairs, he saw that it was night, and yet there were still lights everywhere. People bustled about, and all sorts of businesses could be found. It was a bustling place. He had never seen such a scene before. In the past, Whether it was the mountain and sea realm or the Kunchi continent, they were both vast and sparsely populated. If he flew outside, he wouldn't see a single person for 10 days to half a month. After tidying up the room, he took out the golden page, but couldn't find anything strange about it. He carefully tested it, and found that no matter what he did, he couldn't break it. Obviously, it was no ordinary object. Seeing that he couldn't understand its mysteries, he carefully put it away, then consumed a jade sand seed and sat down on the bed to meditate. 3 days later, an elder of the blood sect from the Li Ming sect came down to lecture about the sect rules. Therefore, he left early in the morning and took a flying lantern to the Xian Tower in the city. He saw that Duan Yukong had also arrived, and they exchanged greetings. An hour later, more and more people arrived. Based on his calculations, there were roughly 3,000 people who had entered the sect. In fact, it wouldn't take more than a year for most of these people to be eliminated. They would have to rely on the support of their clans to survive. Only the true geniuses would be able to establish a foothold here just now. Everyone waited for another 2 hours. Just now, an old man in an embroidered robe arrived. After explaining the rules of the sect, he left without looking back. Han Dingyi knew that this was just a formality, so he didn't mind and walked out with Duan Yukong. Last time, Duan Yukong had promised to treat him to a drink, and this time he did not go back on his word. He invited him to a restaurant, and after 3 rounds of wine, he said, "I wonder if Brother Han still has the secret pill you gave me that day?" He then added, "Little brother will not take advantage of Brother Han." Han Dingyi was prepared. He took out a few more bottles and said, "I believe Brother Duan also has relatives and friends. Take these as gifts from me." Duan Yukong immediately reacted and said, "Is this what brother makes a living?" Han Dingyi didn't deny it and said with a smile, "Yes." Duan Yukong sighed repeatedly and said, "This is a good item, Brother Han's business will be stable now." He had tried this item before. When cultivating the secret records, the effect would increase by at least 10%. Don't look down on it, but after accumulating for a long time, you would be one step ahead of others. To put it bluntly, making a living was only for cultivation. Bloodline was the foundation. If one could awaken their perception, then there was no need for them to bitterly compete with others. He thought for a moment and said, "Little brother will go and get the secret records later. Does Brother Han want to come with me?" Han Dingyi said, "Of course I will." The so-called secret records were how to train one's bloodline and make it more powerful. The ability that Han Dingyi displayed at this moment was thought by others to be the innate power of his bloodline and not the awakening of perception. Because once one awakens their perception, they could change their body and even produce strange phenomena. When they reached a profound level, they could even transform into real gods and monsters. Only with bloodline awakening, the Li Ming blood sect would just now take you as a true disciple. Moreover, they would send you to a secret realm where you could hunt more people of the same bloodline. He didn't need these things, but in order to conceal his identity, he had to go and get them. Otherwise, it would arouse suspicion. In the past 2 days, he had walked around. Although there were many places where he could buy the jade sand seed, ordinary people could only buy half a pot every month. The true disciples of the sect did not have this restriction, so this was his goal. This was the only way he could obtain more jade sand seed. After the 2 of them ate and drank to their heart's content, they went to the blood observation tower together to get the secret records. The person in charge was a serious old man. The 2 of them first handed over their bloodline inheritance jade plates and then reported their names. The old man didn't look at them. After checking the name list, he threw out 2 books and said coldly, "Burn them after reading. If they leak out, your whole family will be exterminated." Then, he waved his hand as if driving them away and sent them out. After the 2 of them left, the old man picked up the jade plates on the table and glanced at them. He was about to throw them aside, but he suddenly stopped. He suddenly took one of Han Dingyi's plates and brought it close to his face. After looking at it carefully, his expression suddenly changed. He muttered to himself, "Dragon's bloodline? Son of the dragon lady?" He pondered deeply for a long time before putting the jade disc away, and then he instructed his subordinates before turning around and instantly transforming into a black-feathered vulture. He flapped his wings and flew towards a pavilion that was faintly visible in the clouds and mist. After Han Dingyi returned, he read the secret records once and memorized them all. After putting them away, he came down to plan the elixir pills with peace of mind. Because the shops and golden pavilions were ready-made, as long as there were people, they could immediately open their doors to make a living. He didn't delay and put the elixir pills that he had refined in advance on the table. He asked a few servants to look after it, and he didn't care anymore. In the first few days, no one asked about it, but about 7 or 8 days later, the number of people who came to ask about it gradually increased. Because the medicine he refined was indeed very useful for the cultivation of the disciples, coupled with the repeated propaganda of Duan Yukong and the other clansmen, it only took about 20 days for him to gain a certain reputation. Often, when a pill was sent to the outside world, it would be immediately snatched up and bought by others. In just a short month, the profit was already quite abundant. However, he also knew that as his reputation spread, the trouble that should come would come sooner or later. Another 10 days passed, and 2 middle-aged men came in. The one in the lead was Yin Spirit Yin Qi. As soon as he entered, he asked him to give up the method of refining the elixir pills. The other person seemed to have a higher status, so he slowly revealed his identity in the Tan clan. Han Dingyi knew that the other party was telling him that his background was clear, and he shouldn't think about using it to go against them. The person in the lead had a calm expression, and he said to himself, "Within 3 days, hand over the method of refining the elixir pills, and I will send someone to take it." After saying that, without another word, the two of them turned and left. It seemed that they didn't care what he thought at all, and they weren't afraid that he wouldn't give in. Han Dingyi smiled in his heart. If he was really a member of the Tan clan, the best choice at this time would be to take a step back, hand over the method of refining the elixir pills, and then do other things. Then, naturally, no one would come to provoke him. However, he wasn't prepared to do that, because he had an advantage over ordinary people. In the eyes of the people of this world, he was a descendant of the dragon race, and from Qin Mo's words, he already knew the value of this bloodline. If he really caused trouble, the sect would definitely not ignore it, and if he displayed enough strength at that time, he could even use it to attract the attention of the sect in advance. When the two people came, they didn't hide it, so the news spread very quickly. When Duan Yukong heard the news, he hurried over, and seriously reminded, "Brother Han, you must not offend these people, or you will definitely be in trouble. Although it's a pity to hand over the elixir pills, it's better than losing your life." After saying that, he was extremely regretful, and said, "It's also my fault for not reminding Brother Han." Han Dingyi smiled, "How can it be Brother Duanyu's fault? How did Brother Duanyu know that these people would even take a liking to a mere elixir pill? Speaking of which, I was too conspicuous here." Duan Yukong repeatedly sighed a few times. Han Dingyi said, "From what Brother Duanyu said, you seem to know the background of these people." Duan Yukong revealed a solemn expression and said, "I've already checked on Brother Han's behalf. These people are from the Wei clan, one of the 33 clans of the sect." Han Dingyi nodded. He had learned beforehand that a clan like the Wei clan couldn't be considered as the true upper echelon of the blood sect, but it was enough to overlook many large clans. This time, it was possible that one of the clan's disciples had taken a liking to the elixir in Han Dingyi's hands, and wanted to keep it for himself. Duan Yukong carefully looked at him, and said, "I still have a business here, and it's not bad. If Brother Han doesn't mind, the two of us can plan carefully, and not fight for the sake of blood and qi." Han Dingyi smiled, and said, "Thank you in advance, Brother Duanyu." Duan Yukong only felt relieved when he saw that there was nothing wrong with him. After Han Dingyi and Duan Yukong sent him off, Han Dingyi returned to his residence, and took out a jade-colored elixir the size of a longan. This was a blood-restoring elixir. In terms of effectiveness, it was several times better than the previous elixir. He had already thought about it. Even if he were to embarrass the Wei clan, as long as he revealed his bloodline awakening ability, it wouldn't be difficult for him to avoid this. However, some things weren't what they seemed on the surface. The Wei clan would definitely not let the matter go, but at the same time, there were people who hated him, and they would definitely come to recruit him because of his value. At that time, he could just throw himself at them, and this elixir would be a perfect gift for them to meet, and at the same time, let them realize his true value. After becoming an official disciple, it would be much more convenient for him to investigate the secrets of this world, or to improve his magical power. While he was pondering, he suddenly realized something was wrong. He stretched out his hand, and took out another blood-restoring elixir from his sleeve. He was startled. He had only refined one elixir, so why were there two now? After thinking for a while, a possibility suddenly came up in his mind. He took out the golden page, and found that the golden color on it had become much dimmer. He carefully picked up one of the elixirs, and placed it on the golden page. A clear reflection appeared on the elixir, and after a moment, the reflection turned and slowly floated up from below. In the blink of an eye, there was another elixir. And the golden page's luster had become even dimmer. He couldn't help but widen his eyes in shock. He knew very well what this meant. He took a deep breath, and held the golden page in his hand. He couldn't help but exclaim, "It's such a treasure." Chapter 1813. In the depths of Bushutian, Zhang Yan had already reflected more than half of the creation essence into his divine will. Because he was ceaselessly comprehending the profound Tao during this entire process, this meant that once this treasure was completely condensed, he'd more or less understood all the principles of how it operated and changed. At that time, he could try to refine and absorb it. However, the more he waited, the more vigilant he became. It was hard to say what the person behind him would do when he succeeded. However, he seemed to have worried too much. Until the moment he succeeded, the person didn't come out to cause trouble. As this object condensed, he seemed to have touched something. All of a sudden, many mysteries clearly appeared in his mind. After a long time, his divine will stabilized. At this moment, he looked at the creation essence again and had a feeling of understanding. He understood that as long as he refined it into his body, he would be able to reach the third level of true yang. However, he didn't immediately do so. He was still examining himself because he felt that there was something wrong with this place. His mind turned and he retreated from inside. He repeatedly examined and deduced, but this time, he couldn't find where the mistake was. After thinking for a long time, he suddenly thought of something. What if it wasn't a problem with this object, but that it was originally defective? With this thought, he felt that he had found the right path. Everything was defective, and if he investigated it to the end, he would only fall into a maze that he couldn't get out of. In fact, this wasn't without reason. The person behind him had made several moves before, and if he was the slightest bit careless, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. That was why he had never let down his guard. That person had used this to block himself outside the door. What was even more brilliant here was that normally, people who reached this door, even if they thought of this, would not recklessly take risks before they could completely confirm their own judgment. And if they didn't dare, then they would never be able to take this step. In fact, no matter who it was, it would be very difficult for them to make up their minds. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, was deep in thought. As his Tao improved, he was able to see this matter more clearly. He believed that this was all because of the mental exhaustion, and the biggest obstacle here was himself. The thing in front of him changed according to his will. If he thought there was a hindrance, then there would definitely be a hindrance. Even if there was no hindrance before, such a change would occur. But he did not mean that everything was fine just because he thought it was fine. Everything here was changing in the direction of decline, so if he wanted to go to the side that was beneficial to him, he had to put in several times the effort. On the contrary, once he relaxed, it would definitely slide in a direction that was not beneficial to him. During this process, any hesitation or apprehension would become a burden to the divine will, causing it to be unable to completely contain this item. Even borrowing the remnant jade was out of the question, because this in itself indicated that he did not dare to directly face this object. At this stage, one had to discard all worries and face the place where the essence of creation was stored fearlessly. Thinking of this, his mind sank into it again. Then, Without hesitation, he pried open the bush Tian Weili and used his boundless magic power to swallow it. In an instant, he felt his body shake. Boundless golden light shone out from the world origin Qi Si, and his magic power and Yuan Qi became boundless. With a slight turn, he could shake the foundation of heaven's secrets. Even the Tai golden bead would not be able to do this. At this stage, it looked like he had stepped into the third level of the true Yang realm. However, Zhang Yan's heart was calm at this moment. Contrary to what he had shown, he did not think that he had reached this level. This was because he felt that everything in front of him was not his own power, but still came from Bush Tian. The only difference was that in the past, he had deliberately borrowed it, but now he only needed to use it with a thought. It seemed like there was no difference, but in reality, that was not the case. Once Busu Tian changed, he would immediately return to his original state. This wasn't what he wanted. He used his divine will to observe his body and discovered that although the essence of creation resided in his body, it still existed independently. Therefore, this wasn't considered the complete process. Only by completely refining it could he truly take it for himself. However, he did not choose to do so immediately. Even now, he did not see any trace of the person behind him. In fact, there was not even a trace of him. It was very likely that the level of the great power he grasped was a level higher than his, so there was no way to find him. He did not believe that the opponent would let him refine this place of creation so easily. Perhaps there were other arrangements waiting for him, most likely after refining this item. Fortunately, it was not that he did not have a way to deal with it. Just now, he could not use the remnant of the jade. Now that there was no problem, he could use it to make some calculations. He retreated once more. Then, he focused his mind and immersed himself into the broken jade. After half a year of calculations, he opened his eyes again. At the same time, his magic power revolved and followed a certain clue to look into the future. Although the heaven's secrets were mixed up, his current magic power was endless, so he did not need to worry about losses. As he spared no magic power, he finally saw a scene. When he was done looking, he could not help but laugh coldly. As he expected, the other party was indeed waiting for him here. The arrangements here could not be said to be bad. Once he took this step, of course, he could succeed, but his magic power would go through an unprecedented process of expansion. Under such circumstances, countless worlds would be born and destroyed, and many more worlds would be born because of this, passing through all the past and future. However, all things have a beginning and an end. The first world that was created and destroyed here was especially important. Many changes would extend from this, just like how many branches grew from the main trunk. If this step was stopped short or led astray, not only would all his previous efforts be wasted, but the Weili that was released could also be borrowed and used by others. Previously, the matter of Han Dingy being trapped in an unknown world was related to this. Han Dingy was the younger generation of his disciple, so there was some karma between them. Of course, it was generally impossible to implicate him just because of this. No true Yang cultivator could do that. However, if he ran into it himself, it would be extremely difficult to say, especially under the circumstances that the other party would use Bushutian's Weili. He pondered for a moment. If he wanted to completely refine the item that contained the essence of creation, then he had to first eliminate this hidden danger. The first thing he had to do was to find this place. Fortunately, the other party had lured Han Dingy inside. Although they could use this to plot against him, they had also left behind a clue. In the Li Ming blood sect, after trying it out a few times, Han Dingy had already somewhat understood the function of this golden page. In general, this golden page could only reflect what it saw. If an entire bottle of pills was placed on it, it could only reflect one bottle at most. Moreover, it would only be reflected when a single item was placed on it. If several items were placed at the same time, this item would not have any reaction. Every time an item was reflected, the golden color on the golden page would fade, but then it would slowly return to its original state. The first time, he only tried it twice, and the golden color was completely used up. After a night passed, at noon the next day, the golden color returned to its original state. He tried it again, and after reflecting 3 items in succession, its color faded again. Similarly, at noon the next day, it returned to its original color. After that, he made a second attempt, which was to first reflect a certain precious material used to refine a pill, and then refine it into a pill. Then, he did the same thing as last time, and this time, he succeeded in reflecting it. After he swallowed it, he found that it still retained its original effect, which meant that the reflected item was completely the same as the real thing, and there would not be any changes. However, when he tried to place items such as magic tools or flying swords on it, the golden page did not react at all. Therefore, he guessed that perhaps only items that could be consumed and refined by a human body would be accepted by the golden page. If not for the fact that his pill bottle was also made from some kind of medicinal powder, allowing him to swallow the pill along with it at a critical moment, the golden page would not have appeared either. Nevertheless, this situation was enough to excite him. Although he could only use it 3 times a day, if he could make good use of this item, it would definitely bring him great benefits. Most importantly, this item seemed to be able to reflect the level of the item he placed on it. As long as it was acknowledged by the golden page, it seemed to be able to reflect it. In other words, if he could find some heavenly treasures and refine them into pills required by this world, he would be able to exchange them for a large amount of jade sand pellets, which he could use to improve his cultivation. He tried again and again, and suddenly, a ray of light rose from the outside. Only then did he realize that without him knowing, it was already the 3rd day. The people from the Wei clan would probably arrive soon. He pondered for a moment, then placed the golden page in a proper place, not mixing it with the other items. Then, he sat down cross-legged and adjusted his breathing. About 2 hours later, the dejection accumulated over the past 3 days was completely swept away, and his divine qi was once again restored to its original state. After that, he took out a few jade sand pellets and crushed them, turning them into smoke and absorbing them into his aperture acupoints. Since he might have to fight with the people who came later, he had to maintain a certain amount of energy. After a long time, a servant came to report that 2 men were here to look for him. He immediately knew that the other party had come looking for him, so he said, "Tell the 2 of them to wait here, I'll be there in a moment." After that, he tidied himself up a little, then got down from the bed. Slowly, he walked down the stairs. The 2 middle-aged men were already a little impatient from waiting. At this moment, when they saw him appear, the one with the more robust body suddenly stood up and said with a gloomy face, "Han Dingy, 3 days have passed. Quickly take out the pill's secret formula." Han Dingy stood on the stairs and asked, "You are from the Wei clan?" The other man, who was sitting on a chair, said unhurriedly, "Since you already know, we won't say anything more. Hand it over as soon as possible, and we'll be done with it." He gave Han Dingy a glance, and when he saw that Han Dingy didn't move, he seemed to have understood something. He sneered, then took out a talisman and threw it on the table. "Since I've taken your things, bring this talisman here in the future. I can help you put in a few words for some trivial matters." After that, he picked up the teacup and took a sip. Han Dingy looked at the 2 men, then said calmly, "Both of you, please leave." The man sitting on the chair was surprised. He stopped what he was doing and raised his head to look at Wu Qi. Then, a mocking smile appeared on his face. He turned to look at the other man and said lightly, "Be careful when you attack. As long as you don't become too stupid, it'll be fine." The muscular man immediately revealed a ferocious smile, and at the same time, his eyes turned a deep blue. Chapter 1814. Zhang Yan finally found the location of that world after carefully calculating for a few days, relying on the trace of an unseen connection. It was not in Bushutian, nor was it in the void primordial sea. It seemed to be an independent space that was not inferior to the void primordial sea. There were even rules that he could not see through. Even though he'd found this place, it would slip away from his senses from time to time. It was like holding fine sand in his hand, and if he was slightly careless, it would slip through the cracks between his fingers. If he wanted to destroy this place, it would take quite some effort. However, it might not be impossible for him to accomplish it with his current boundless strength. However, he thought about it again. Even if he did that, it would not solve the problem. A powerful being like him could destroy the world with a single thought. Although it was an existence similar to the void primordial sea and not something an ordinary world could be here, as long as the person behind it could borrow the power of Bushutian, he could recreate this world at any time. At that time, without karma, it would be even more difficult to find its whereabouts. After careful consideration, he decided that the most appropriate way to deal with this was to send the cultivators of his sect to that realm. As long as he could overwhelm the other side, he could find a way to integrate it into Busu Tian's void primordial sea. Then, even if he couldn't destroy this place, he could still eliminate this hidden danger. He could even take back the great power that the other side had stolen and use it to improve his cultivation. He thought about it. The first person to be sent to this world had to be careful. If their cultivation was too high, it would not be easy to hide. Once exposed, it would be very likely that the person behind it would notice and target them. Another reason was that Han Dingyi was equivalent to the anchor of this world. If the cultivation of those who entered was much higher than Han Dingyi, it was very likely that they would not be able to enter. Therefore, only some low-level disciples could go to this world. However, as long as the disciples who entered first did not die, then the number of people who came down could increase. When his doppelganger could descend, he would almost be able to control this world. In the Li Ming blood sect, as the eyes of the sturdy middle-aged man emitted a faint blue light, an indescribable wave of mind spread out. This person's bloodline ability could bewitch the mind of others and even make them completely obedient to him. At that time, he could easily ask them everything he wanted to know. There was only one thing. Even if the person who was hit by his strange power could survive, he would only be an idiot. When Han Dingyi saw the other party's eyes flash, he felt a strange force rushing into his sea of consciousness. He sneered in his heart. If one were to talk about invading the sea of consciousness, the most powerful one would be the spiritual gate that came along with the profound gate. Although the Xian and Ling families had long let go of their past grievances, demons and the like still existed. Moreover, there were now more demons from the outer realms. Therefore, they had never let down their guard against devouring souls. Almost all the disciples of the Xian Gate practiced this. That person did not expect that his strange power would be blocked. As if he was hit by a backlash, he took a few steps back. Black blood suddenly flowed out of his 7 orifices. He seemed to be extremely angry. He raised his head and let out a fierce roar. At the same time, the whole residence actually shook. When the other person saw this, his expression changed. He secretly cursed in his heart, and with a flash, he retreated far away. Han Dingyi was shocked as well, and then a profound glow emanated from his body to instantly protect himself. He felt waves of impact surge towards his body, and then his entire body shook. When everything ended, he raised his eyes to look and saw that the entire pavilion had actually been instantly razed to the ground. The place where he and his opponent stood had turned into 2 huge pits that had sunk into the ground. He looked up and saw that the person had gone to the sky. However, at this moment, his appearance had changed greatly. His whole body was covered with blue scales that extended all the way to his cheeks. There was a pair of flesh wings on his back. He could not help but be a little surprised. He did not think that this person had actually awakened the bloodline. However, he was not afraid at all. It could even be said that this was the moment he had been waiting for. According to the sect rules that day, the people of the sect were not allowed to fight in the city. However, when their lives were in danger, they were not restricted by this rule. Even if there were deaths or injuries, the sect would not pursue the matter. Of course, this was just the rule on the surface. For a big clan like the Wei clan, if they failed to achieve their goal, and were even humiliated instead, how could they let it go? They would always have a way to deal with him. However, since he had already expected this, he naturally had a way to deal with it. At this moment, a commotion came from his left. He turned his head and saw another person had appeared there. His body was blurry, as if he had merged with the water vapor. Han Dingyi looked at the 2 people who seemed to have no scruples. He asked curiously, Aren't you afraid of being punished by the sect rules for making such a big commotion? The blue-scaled man spat out a mouthful of blood. He wiped the corner of his mouth and said with a sinister smile, "What trouble? When the time comes, you just have to say that you were the one who attacked first. That way, it won't be considered as breaking the sect rules." Han Dingy nodded and said, "So that's how it is. That makes sense." The blue-scaled man couldn't help but be surprised at how calm he was. The other person could tell that something was wrong and said, "Be careful, there's something strange about this kid." The blue-scaled man laughed savagely. Without awakening and without learning any secret techniques, how could he possibly fight with him? The wings on his back flapped and he charged down. He usually used his soul power to injure others, but this wasn't the only method he had. His muscles and bones were just as tough, and he could even smash a hole through a rock wall. Ever since Han Dingy entered this world, he had never fought with these disciples of the big clans. Now that he saw their momentum and combined it with the Tan clan's records, he could roughly deduce that even if he didn't use his dragonization transformation, he would still be able to deal with them. Unfortunately, in order to not expose himself, he couldn't use the mystic tools he brought with him. Otherwise, he could immediately end the battle. Now, he could only rely on his own transcendence energy. He circulated his transcendence energy, and a beam of golden and fiery mystic light spun and flew up, wrapping around the other party's head. The blue-scaled man suddenly felt that something was amiss. This beam of light actually gave him an extremely strong sense of danger. He wanted to dodge, but once he started charging forward, he couldn't easily change his course. He could only raise his arms to protect his head. Then, a blue light flashed on his wings to protect his upper body, and he crashed into the beam of light. The mystic light came up and wrapped around him, then twisted and turned like a golden rainbow, and retracted. At this moment, looking at the person again, he saw that only his upper body was left, but his arms and wings were already full of holes, and there was no trace of him below his waist. Because his momentum was not exhausted, he crashed into the ruins of the house with a boom, stirring up a large amount of debris and dust. Han Dingy looked at him. Although this person was seriously injured and lost the ability to fight, his severed limbs were actually wriggling and growing back. The speed was not fast, but if he didn't care about it, he might be able to recover by relying on some secret technique. Therefore, he didn't show any mercy at all. The mystic light on his body changed again, and just as he was about to finish this person off, he suddenly felt a turbulent pressure coming from his left, and he knew that the other person had made a move. He didn't move, and the mystic light split into two. One was like a barrier protecting his side, and the other bombarded the other. With a loud bang, the ground shook, and the blue-scaled man, who was no longer able to move, was instantly ground into a pile of rotten meat. The other person saw that the situation was not good, and his figure immediately faded, finally disappearing, completely submerging into the atmosphere. How could Han Dingy let this person go? At this moment, he could rely on the sect's rules to kill him openly, and it would be justifiable after the matter was over. If the other person went back and distorted the truth, then he would be in a very passive position, and the most appropriate thing to do was to clean up the mess. At this moment, he suddenly felt a strange force enveloping him, and he suddenly felt as if his body was weighed down by thousands of kilograms. In his heart, he knew that someone else was making a move, but he didn't look at it at all. He stimulated the dragon blood, and his body instantly turned into a cloud of smoke, and he broke free of this restriction. Then, with a thought, his body was instantly wrapped in mystic light, and in a flash, he had caught up to that person not far behind. At the same time, he spat out a light from his mouth, and a golden light shot out. There was only a scream, and that person's figure, like water smoke, changed back to his original appearance, except that there was a big hole in his back and chest. Obviously, this person did not have the ability to regrow limbs like the blue-scaled man just now. He staggered a few steps, turned his head to look at Wu Qi, and then fell to the ground, leaning against a wall. Only then did Han Dingy turn his head and look up. He saw a man in a black robe standing on a paper kite, holding a huge staff in his hand, with 12 fist-sized lanterns strung on it. The lanterns were fluttering in the air, and he was staring at Han Dingy with a cold gaze. Wu Qi's heart tightened. From his clothes, he could tell that this should be the guard of this place. However, from his expression, it was not difficult to deduce that even if this person was not from the Wei clan, he must be related to them. Thinking of the 3 days deadline set by the man, Wu Qi couldn't help but speculate that this person might be one of their own people planted by the two men. The man in black robe looked at him and said, "How dare you kill a fellow disciple in the sect? If I don't take you down, who else will abide by the rules?" Han Dingyi understood that this man was trying to pin a crime on him. But now that both men were killed by him, it would not be so easy to throw dirty water on him. Just now, the man in black robe's words were just an excuse for him to attack. Immediately, he waved his long staff, as if he was about to do something. Han Dingyi was not in the mood to fight with him. And Shou had a higher authority, and once someone like this showed up, according to the rules, Han Dingyi could only surrender. However, it was obvious that this man was siding with the two men, so how could Han Dingyi put his life in his hands? However, fighting with him was not a good idea either. Even if he won, the Wei clan would definitely make a fuss about it later. With a thought, he transformed into a wisp of smoke and drifted away with the wind. The man in black robe was startled, then he shouted angrily, "How dare you!" In fact, he could have asked the other guards to attack together with him. But, he wanted to cover up this matter and get himself out of this mess. Therefore, he didn't want the others to find out the truth. Instead, he stepped on the paper kite and chased after Wu Qi. However, he had miscalculated. Although Han Dingyi's speed was not fast, he was able to blend into the wind, and was not restricted by the terrain. In times of crisis, Han Dingyi could still pass through the buildings. As in Shou, it was impossible for him to attack those buildings. Therefore, after chasing for a long time, he still could not find anything. After delaying for a long time, Han Dingyi suddenly heard the sound of something piercing through the air. He knew that he had finally attracted the attention of the sect. If this bet was right, then he would be safe for the time being. Perhaps, he could even use this chance to enter the eyes of the upper echelons. Chapter 18:15. Ripples appeared in the air above the Xiong continent, and two cultivators entered this place. One of them was dressed in green and had a scholarly appearance. He was Gao Jianfeng of the Mystic Yin Heavenly Palace, and the other was Lu Huan of the Alchemy Celestial sect. This person didn't look good at first, but his eyes were very bright. Both of them weren't disciples of the Qinsang school. This was because Zhang Yan was worried that the people he sent out might be noticed by the person behind him. Gao Jianfeng looked around and said, "Daoist Lu, do you want to find Daoist Han?" Lu Huan was also looking around and said, "No rush. With this person here, even if we are exposed, we can still send more people here. Let's get a general idea of the situation here first." Gao Jianfeng agreed. He took out a small bronze cauldron, activated his spell, and opened the lid. In a split second, dozens of invisible devils flew out and went in all directions to investigate the situation. Different from Han Dingyi, they came prepared. Adding on the fact that the demons were moving around silently, the two of them had a general idea of the situation here after about a month. However, Gao Jianfeng found that a few demons didn't come back. His expression became serious. Although there wasn't any turbidine spirit energy for them to absorb, the demons could still survive by devouring souls. It could only be said that there was no lack of methods to deal with demons here. He frowned and said, "Not simple." Lu Huan smiled and said, "It's fine. We're just here to scout. The rest isn't something we can do. As long as we have a foothold, even if I can't do it, someone suitable will come." This sky world wasn't a place that could be casually entered. They needed someone to be the anchor. They were mystic light realm cultivators, so the next person who came could only be about the same realm. If their cultivation was too much higher than theirs, they would only be trapped in the void world. However, it wasn't that they didn't have a solution. The two of them were both at the third level of the mystic light realm and were about to break through. If they broke through to the core formation realm here, they would have enough power to attract people of the same generation. However, when they arrived, they realized that there was no trace of spirit opportunity here. It was extremely difficult to break through to the next level. What was more difficult was that the world of heaven was neither in the primordial sea of the void nor in the Busu heaven. Zhang Yan had to calculate and sense every time to find the whereabouts of the world of heaven. Things like the Two Realms dial and the sky-reaching dial were useless. Therefore, when they came here, they could not communicate with the sect and could only rely on themselves. Inside the Li Mingshu's sect, things were just as Han Dingyi had predicted. The black-robed man had no choice but to stop when the people from the sect arrived. He did not know what the sect's verdict was, but since no one came to make things difficult for him, it was more than enough to prove that he had indeed caught the attention of some people in the upper echelons. Otherwise, with the power of Wei clan, it would be very easy for them to play some tricks on him, and not let him pass so easily. Because his body had turned into smoke during the battle, it was enough to prove that he had reached the level of enlightenment. Therefore, a few days later, the sect gave him a talisman. The Li Mingshu's sect was divided into 4 paths: hindrance, propagation, acceptance, and perfection. With this talisman, he could go to the path of propagation. The front of the talisman had the word propagation written on it, and the back of the talisman had the word hindrance written on it. After he tried it, he realized that it was also a boundary. When he turned the talisman and the word hindrance was facing outward, he was in front of an ordinary building. But when he turned the talisman and the word illumination was facing outward, he found himself on a street. However, his position in the city did not change at all. He couldn't help but realize that even though all the members of the blood sect resided in the same large city, due to the difference in their statuses, the airspace they resided in was completely different. It was as if multiple worlds were embedded together, but people of different statuses were unable to see each other, nor were they able to communicate with each other. He also speculated that it was the same for the descendants of the deities and monsters. Without reaching a certain status, and unless they took the initiative to appear, it would be impossible for him to come into contact with them. He pondered in his heart. He did not know whether this was something the deities and monsters possessed themselves, or if it was done by a powerful person. If it was the latter, it would be difficult for him to determine the strength of such a person with his cultivation. Another few days passed, and someone from the sect came to ask about the secret medicine. Because he had already achieved his goal, he did not need to refine the pill in secret anymore, and handed over the formula without hesitation. The person from the sect also left in satisfaction. Before he left, he even left a cultivation manual for him, and told him that if he wanted to learn more profound manuals, he could go to the returning mountain scripture building to look for them. Han Dingyi waited until the person left, and opened the manual to read it. He realized that this manual was not as simple as the one he had obtained at the beginning. It was much more detailed. Once a disciple of the sect awakened their bloodline, they would be able to dig out the hidden power in their bloodline. Usually, it would be manifested in a certain part of their body that would experience a mutation in their bloodline. However, awakening one's bloodline did not mean that one's strength would increase. They still needed to go through a long period of hard training to dig out the potential in their bloodline. At the same time, they would also need to cultivate the corresponding secret manual. If they cultivated the secret manual well, they could even cover up the lack of bloodline to a certain extent. However, the difference in bloodline was also quite large. For example, once the descendants of the deities and monsters awakened their bloodline, even if they did not cultivate the secret manual, they would be able to unleash much more power than the descendants of the ferocious beasts and evil beasts. This was also why all the disciples of the Li Ming blood sect were at least born in the big clans. This was to ensure that their bloodline would not be too low. However, a better bloodline would only bring a higher starting point. In the past, there were many people who relied purely on cultivating the secret manual to become a powerful person. This was the purpose of the sect. Han Dingyi thought that after swallowing the essence blood of the flood dragon, he would be equivalent to a real dragon. He wondered if he could also use the method to cultivate. He did not forget about his own cultivation method. However, he did not have enough jade sand seeds to support his cultivation, and he was in urgent need of the power to protect himself. Therefore, he could only start from this aspect. After studying for a few days, he remembered the returning mountain scripture building mentioned by the people from the sect. Thus, he flipped open the talisman and flew towards that place. He initially thought that this place was just an ordinary scripture building. However, he did not expect that when he arrived at the boundary, he found out that it occupied an entire hill. It was filled with tall buildings and countless scriptures. Instantly, he felt that he had come to the right place. With all these, he would be able to find out the things he wanted to know in a much faster time. However, as soon as he stepped into the building, he found out that many people who came to read the scriptures were pointing at him and whispering to each other. He circulated his arcane energy and listened carefully. However, he found out that they were talking about him killing 2 disciples of the Wei clan. Instantly, he felt that something was wrong. He was born in the direct line of descent of the sect leader of the Blue Feather Pavilion. Therefore, he had a much deeper understanding of these matters than an ordinary disciple. As a matter of fact, what happened this time had caused the Wei clan to lose face. They were trying to cover it up, and would never take the initiative to spread the news. But now, it seemed like everyone knew about it. There must be someone behind this. He did not know what his goal was. Perhaps it was to damage the reputation of the Wei clan. But no matter what, he was the weakest among them. If he was not careful, he would be smashed into pieces. He had a bad feeling in his heart, but soon, his expression returned to normal. No matter what, he had to make use of this period of time to strengthen himself. He would absorb as many things as he could, and at worst, he would just leave. Not to mention the Wankei starry stream, even the Xiong continent was a vast place. He could still survive if he left this place. At the moment, in one of the 4 daos of the sect, in a luxurious palace, a slender and frail young girl was lying on a bed. She was coughing non-stop, and her cheeks were flushed with a sickly red. A lady clad in a phoenix feather cloak, with a silver tear on her forehead, was sitting by the bed. She placed her hand on the young girl's forehead, and after a while, the young girl finally calmed down. With a weak voice, she asked, "Mother, will I be able to recover from this strange illness?" The lady said softly, "Don't be afraid, Xianer. Mother has a way." She pressed her forehead again, and the young girl fell into a deep sleep. However, there was still a hint of pain between her brows. She sighed. Her daughter was so talented that she could awaken her bloodline before she was 5 years old. She awakened her bloodline for the second time when she was 9 years old, and now, she had awakened her bloodline for the 3rd time at the age of 15. No one of her age could compare to her. She should have been able to soar into the sky with a single leap, but unexpectedly, after awakening her bloodline for the 3rd time, she contracted a strange illness that was passed down in the clan. Only 1 out of 100 people in the clan would contract this illness, but she did not expect that it would fall on her daughter. Usually, this illness could not be cured, but there was a way. If she could seize someone else's bloodline and implant it into her daughter's body, not only would this illness be cured, but if she was lucky, the awakened bloodline would be even more powerful. However, there was a problem. The chosen bloodline must be able to suppress the young girl's own bloodline. Madame Ling was the bloodline of Qing Nu, and even the bloodlines of the 33 clans in the sect could not compare to her. Of course, it was not that there was no one who could surpass her bloodline, but the clans that possessed such a bloodline all had powerful backgrounds and were not people that she could covet. If she acted rashly, she would only bring disaster to herself. However, at this moment, Han Dingyi came into her sight. The bloodline of the true dragon was much more powerful than the bloodline of Qing Nu, and he did not seem to have any powerful background, so he was the most suitable candidate. Although this was not too fair to the person whose bloodline had been seized, there was no such thing as fairness in this world. There was only the law of the jungle. After the woman comforted her daughter, she turned around and said to an elder who was waiting there, "Look after this person for me. Give him whatever he needs. Don't be stingy." The elder understood that Han Dingyi had not yet reached the conditions needed to seize the bloodline. This was only to make him enter the second awakening as soon as possible, and he could only use him after he matured. However, he still had some concerns. He said, "The person whose bloodline has been seized will definitely die. This person might have a true dragon behind him." "Mistress, do you really want to do this?" The woman said plainly, "If he really did, why would he be allowed to come here? He would have been taken into the dragon sect a long time ago. There is no need for you to say anything more. I have already decided on this matter, and I will bear any consequences." Chapter 18:16. 2 years later, on an island somewhere in the Xionglu, there was a rumbling sound and a puff of smoke pierced the sky. The fishermen on the sea thought that there was a fire eruption and were all scared away. In the depths of the island, in a cave created by external force, Lu Huan stood up from his seat. After more than a year of hard cultivation, he had now entered the core transformation realm. This was because the two of them were prepared to break through before they came, so it went so smoothly. The only thing they didn't expect was that there was not a bit of spiritual opportunity in this world. He had already used more than half of the replenishing medicinal pills they brought, and it was not enough for the other person. Lu Huan smiled and said, "Brother Gao, you can only wait for a while more." Gao Jianfeng didn't care and said, "No worries, as long as there is enough spirit and external medicine in the Ling sect, even without enough spiritual opportunity, we can still break through the realm. It's just a little more effort." Lu Huan said, "Now that I have entered the core transformation realm, if the upper sect sends people here, they will be of the same generation as the core transformation realm." Gao Jianfeng nodded. After arriving here, they didn't know the situation in the sect, and Bushutian also didn't know what they were doing, but it was not difficult to notice that some of them had improved. He said, "When you were in seclusion, I looked around and finally found out the whereabouts of Daoist Han. He must have come into contact with a large bloodline clan here, and I don't know how, but he was sent to the largest sect here, the Li Mingshu sect. Should we take the initiative to make contact with him?" Lu Huan thought for a while and said, "Although Daoist Han entered the sect, it must not be easy. It is hard to say that there are no people watching him, so there is no need to make contact with him now. However, if you have the means, why not leave a mark somewhere to remind him so that Daoist Han can be prepared?" Gao Jianfeng said, "That's good. I can't infiltrate that sect, but I left a spy in the large clan. As long as Daoist Han returns there, he will find something." Lu Huan thought again and said, "We should also leave a mark where Daoist Han is, so that he will know that we are here, but there is no way to communicate, so there is no need. It is best that we do not meet face to face." Gao Jianfeng said, "Is Daoist afraid that something will happen?" Lu Huayan said, "It's never wrong to be on guard." Right at this moment, the two of them suddenly felt a strange movement. They couldn't help but stop and look at the empty space in front of them. They saw layers of ripples there, and then a person walked out. Ever since Han Dingyi entered the scripture pavilion, he had spent most of his time here for the past 2 years. Because his cultivation could not be improved in a short period of time, he was not in a hurry. The more he saw, the deeper his understanding of this world would be. This way, if he did not stay in the sect, it would be easier for him to survive elsewhere. In the future, if he had the chance to return to Busa Tian, he would be able to tell more things. In the past, he thought that the people here purely relied on bloodline battles, and he felt some contempt in his heart. However, after reading the secret records here, he realized that this was actually a misunderstanding. Normally, there were 3 stages of bloodline cultivation, awakening. This was the process of continuously digging into one's own bloodline. However, after reaching the 3rd stage, it was not so. One could already be inspired to have their own unique supernatural power, and thus walk on a different path. This step was called opening fate. Of course, if one was willing to continue on the path of bloodline development, that was awakening for the 4th stage, but in the end, one would only become a monster of the source of bloodline. If that's the case, then the bloodline is just a springboard to the upper realm for the upper sect disciples. He thought about it and felt that this was actually a correct path. Because there was no spiritual opportunity in this world, it was almost impossible for ordinary people to have great power like cultivators, or even to transcend the mortal world. Relying on bloodline was considered a correct choice. When one truly possessed the Whaley, understood its mysteries, and had their own path, then the ladder that they used to climb up could be abandoned. Just as he was deep in thought, a disciple came over and bowed to him. Then, he handed over an item and said, "Senior Brother Han, this is what the higher-ups asked you to do." Han Dingy thanked the person and took the item. When he saw that it was a large box of blood medicine, he couldn't help but have an idea. Ever since he became an official disciple, the faction had given him a lot of support, almost giving him anything he wanted. It was as if they wanted him to quickly improve his strength. This attitude was very interesting. A disciple of the Li Ming blood sect was supposed to have the responsibility to go out and kill demons and monsters, but he had never been ordered to do so. He didn't know if it was because they were worried about his safety, or for some other reason. Therefore, 2 years ago, he tried to test them, saying that he wanted to go out and kill monsters. However, this request was quickly rejected. Someone came to comfort him, saying that his bloodline was not ordinary, and that he should just focus on cultivation. This seemed very normal, but he felt that there was a deeper purpose behind it. This was not because he was overly suspicious, but because half a year ago, the Tan family had heard that he had the awakening bloodline, so they sent someone to invite him back to the Tan family to complete the marriage. At that time, he was studying all kinds of secrets, so he didn't want to go back. However, without waiting for his reply, the faction made the decision for him, and the Tan clan didn't dare to say anything. From the looks of it, there were people above him who didn't want him to take even half a step out of the sect. He couldn't guess the purpose of this at the moment, but it was obvious that before his strength reached a certain level, they wouldn't lay their cards on the table with him. Therefore, it was better to take advantage of this time to get more benefits, and think of other things slowly. Today, after he finished reading another book, he went to the next level. There were countless books in this place. Although he had a photographic memory, and his reading speed was much faster than others, he didn't think he could read everything in this place. Therefore, for the past few years, he only picked out the more important books to read. Not long after he reached the next level, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned around and saw a girl with a veil covering her face. She had a slim figure, and her face was covered with a misty veil. Her clothes were also floating like smoke, and when she walked, part of her clothes would merge with the heaven and earth. One look and one could tell that she was not an ordinary girl. Although this place was spacious, Han Dingy still quietly moved a few steps further away. After being here for a long time, he knew that some of the upper families viewed the bloodline of monsters and monsters as impure bloodlines. If he went forward rashly, it would bring him some trouble. Now that he had offended the Wei clan, he didn't want to offend more people for no reason. Unexpectedly, when the girl saw him, she turned around and walked towards him, saying, "You must be Junior Marshal Brother Han." Han Dingy put down the book. Although he was vigilant, he didn't show any impatience on his face. He said, "Yes, I am. May I know how I should address you, Senior Marshal Sister?" The girl didn't answer. She looked at him and said, "I heard that you are a descendant of the dragon race." Han Dingy said politely, "According to the bloodline inheritance jade plate, I am a descendant of the dragon bloodline." The girl said, "Actually, you should go to the dragon sect, not the Li Ming blood sect." After saying that, she turned around and left. Han Dingy frowned. He didn't know what the girl meant. He thought about it a few times, but he couldn't figure it out. He shook his head and didn't think too deeply about it. He just decided to act according to the steps he had planned. When night came, he thought about how he hadn't returned for a long time, so he went back to his room. However, when he reached the door, he found an old man waiting for him. He recognized him as the person who came to ask for the secret pill on behalf of the sect. He quickly cupped his hands and said, "Why are you here, Elder Ming? Do you have a decree from the sect?" Elder Ming looked at him and said in a deep voice, "I have something to say to disciple nephew Han alone." When Han Dingy heard that, he knew that the old man had come for a private matter. He said, "I can't invite an esteemed guest normally. Elder Ming, please take a seat in the inner room." After inviting Elder Ming to sit in the inner room, he personally served him tea and sat down. Elder Ming took a sip and praised, "The fragrance enters the lungs, and the aftertaste lingers." Han Dingyi smiled and said, "I just added a few pills." Elder Ming nodded and said, "Disciple-nephew Han's talent in alchemy is extraordinary. If I didn't, I wouldn't have been able to refine a high-grade secret pill like the Na medicine." Han Dingyi said humbly, "It's just a pill. It's not very useful." Elder Daoran said, "Don't underestimate it. The Li Ming blood sect and the evil Yang blood sect have been in conflict for a long time. With this secret pill, the strength of the lower-level disciples has increased rapidly. They have indeed gained a lot of face for the sect in the past few days. You have an extraordinary bloodline, so cultivate well here. The sect will not mistreat you." Han Dingyi sneered in his heart, but he still put on a respectful expression. Elder Ming took out a secret book and placed it on the table. Half warning and half admonishing, he said, "I've seen you flipping through the fate opening method recently. This is still far from you. Why don't you take a good look at these 2 secret books? They'll be very useful for your second awakening." Han Dingyi accepted it and said humbly, "Disciple-nephew will remember." Elder Ming was very satisfied with his attitude. The current Han Dingyi was far from meeting the requirements to steal the bloodline. Only by entering the second awakening as soon as possible could he be of use to the clan. He also felt that it was a pity. If it wasn't for this incident, with Han Dingyi's bloodline, he would definitely become a pillar of the sect after hundreds or thousands of years. But now, for the sake of the young master, he had no choice but to sacrifice this person. On the island, Gao Jianfeng and Lu Huayan saw that the newcomer was wearing a Daoist robe and his aura was also of the Shenmen path. Knowing that it was another fellow Daoist, they stepped forward and bowed. Lu Huayan said, "Greetings, fellow Daoist. May I ask for your name?" The newcomer returned the greeting and said, "I am Luo Zhitong, a disciple of the Spirit Returning sect." Lu Huayan saw that he was also a core formation cultivator, but he came so quickly. This meant that the high sect was very clear about the changes in their bodies and did not treat them as pawns that could be casually discarded. Lu Huayan couldn't help but feel slightly relieved. Luo Zhitong asked, "What's the situation here?" Lu Huayan roughly told him what he knew. Luo Zhitong said, "In order to prevent the mighty figures here from noticing our traces, the high sect will only continue to send fellow Taoists into this realm after a period of time. During this period of time, I hope that the 2 of you can work with me to establish a foothold here so that it'll be convenient for fellow Taoists from other sects to come in the future." Lu and Gao both said, "How dare we not try our best?" Chapter 18-17. Ever since Elder Ming left, Han Dingyi no longer went to the scripture pavilion. There were many things that could only be seen after reaching life opening, and it seemed like the people of Wei clan were trying to find trouble with him again. He could tell that someone was pressuring him both openly and secretly, forcing him to enter the second stage of awakening. He couldn't help but recall the words of the woman he met that day. She said that it was not suitable for him to stay in the Li Ming blood sect, and that he should go to the dragon sect. He couldn't help but think that the problem might be the bloodline that he had revealed, and that there might be someone up there who wanted to use his bloodline to do something. Although he felt that this guess might not be correct, it should be close to the truth. Now that he had almost gotten what he wanted, and even if he couldn't get it, it was not something that he could covet right now. He needed to find a chance to leave this place as soon as possible. He didn't do anything extra in these 2 years, just to let others think that he was obeying the arrangements of the sect, and that he could enjoy all kinds of cultivation conveniences with peace of mind. However, he also understood that Elder Ming's visit this time, and pointing out the contents of the secret records, was undoubtedly to remind him that his every move was being watched. Therefore, it would be extremely difficult for him to leave this place. If he followed the normal path, it would be almost impossible. However, he had been planning this since he joined the sect, and now he already had a complete set of plans. He thought to himself, just now Elder Ming came, he must think that I'll settle down in these 2 days. This is a good opportunity for me to leave quickly. If I'm late, I won't be able to do anything if he locks me up here. After making up his mind, he first went to a medicine shop. Because he was concocting pills, he would come here almost every 10 days to half a month. Therefore, his actions were very normal, and no one would suspect anything. When he turned a corner in an alley, he left a dragon scale that was formed from his blood essence in an inconspicuous corner. This was the art of interlinked scales. As long as there was a scale, he could teleport himself out of the place. However, the disadvantage was that it would consume too much of his magic power, and he might not even be able to fight back for a few days, and would only be slightly stronger than a mortal. Therefore, after using this technique, he needed to rest for a few days, at least to give him time to replenish his magic power. However, time was extremely precious when it came to escaping. Right now, he wasn't very clear about the methods of the upper echelons of the Li Mingxu's sect, but he could roughly treat them as cultivators. If he delayed even a little bit here, he might be captured and brought back. Therefore, he had to make use of this opportunity to escape as far as possible. Once everything was ready, he announced that he would go into seclusion. Elder Ming had been monitoring his every move. After learning of this matter, he was relieved, thinking that his warning had worked. Han Dingy patiently waited until nightfall before he placed the array flags that he had prepared in the surroundings. He poured Yingli water on them, and after 10 days, the array flags would be destroyed without leaving a single trace. After everything was settled, he activated the art of interlinked scales and appeared at the corner in the morning. Then, he immediately spat out the dragon's blood essence. The Li Mingxu's sect did not allow disciples to enter and leave the sect as they pleased, but they were not so strict with others. After all, when disciples of the great clans came to cultivate, they would need servants. These people did not have any special bloodline power, and were no different from mortals. Now that he had lost the dragon's blood essence, the jade mirror at the entrance would not have any reaction, and he could sneak into the crowd. Just now, when he took a step forward, he felt a sense of weakness under his feet. This was a sign that he had used too much mana. However, he still had his strong body. Although cultivators of the Qi Dao did not focus on cultivating their physical bodies, they could be used as a raft to cross the world. The firmness and toughness of their bodies were not something that mortals could imagine. As he walked towards the entrance of the sect, he swallowed a jade sand seed that he had prepared in advance. His mind was racing. The awakening of the bloodline usually took 10 to 20 days, and during this period, there could not be any disturbances, especially during the second awakening. If anything happened, all the previous efforts would be in vain. Therefore, if everything went smoothly, he should have about a month's time. However, the sect would not wait that long. They would definitely come to check ahead of time. Therefore, he had about half a month's time. He could not return to the Tan clan. He could only go somewhere else, and the further away he was from the sect, the better. A determined look appeared on his face. If he still could not escape the pursuit of the sect, then he could only commit suicide. He could not let the secret that he carried be exposed to the eyes of the people of this world. About 4 hours later, he arrived at the entrance and blended into a group of carriages. When he passed by the large stone, there was no reaction from above. Although he knew this would happen, he still couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief in his heart. However, this did not mean that there was no danger here. After passing through the entrance, there was still a stretch of water to travel. The Li Ming blood sect would not care about servants and the like. Therefore, there were many people who would rob and kill passers-by on this stretch of road. Within the sect, those who did not have the bloodline were treated like pigs and dogs. Even if they were killed, no one would look into it. Fortunately, he was well prepared. It was not as if he did not have the strength to resist. He even faintly displayed a threatening aura. Therefore, there was no danger along the way. He smoothly borrowed a waterfall and left the sect. The moment he came out, he felt his vision blur. He found that he was already above the sea. The sky was high and the sea was wide. The blue sky was clear. He did not know if it was because he had temporarily escaped danger, but his body suddenly relaxed a little. When he was in the sect, he had memorized all the maps of the sea. At this moment, he slightly identified the direction. He barely managed to gather a little of the Fa that he just now had recovered. He slowly flew towards a small island nearby. He stayed here for a day. When his Fa had recovered a little, he flew away. The old man waited for 7 or 8 days. Not a single sound came from Han Dingyi's residence. Although he knew that this was normal, he still felt that something was wrong. However, because the process of awakening could not be disturbed in the slightest, if it failed because of him, he would not be able to bear the responsibility, so he could only endure it. After waiting for more than 10 days, there was still no movement. At this time, he felt that something was wrong. After careful consideration, he decided to personally investigate. However, the result made him shocked and angry. He opened the door to his residence, but found that the room was empty. There was not a single person in it. He immediately sent people to search, and at the same time, he returned to the clan to report. When the woman heard this, she angrily rebuked, "What kind of person do you think you are?" Her pretty face was almost twisted. She had given Han Dingyi things these years, and Madame Ling did not lack such things. However, the sect had its own rules. Disciples could not only cultivate but also work for the sect. In order to make Han Dingyi obediently stay in the sect, she had paid a great price and owed a favor. The key was that without this person, her daughter would lose all hope of recovery. The old man said, "Mistress, there's something fishy about this person's escape. I've kept a close watch on both the inside and the outside, but there's not the slightest movement. It's impossible for him to escape alone. Moreover, he's been very respectful these past few years. He doesn't know what we're going to do, so why would he escape?" The woman frowned and said, "Are you saying that someone is going against me?" The elder lowered his head and said nothing. The woman gritted her teeth and said, "I was careless. Madam Xiao, it must be those bitches. They must have guessed my plan." After venting for a while, she calmed down a little and said, "I have the Yang divination technique. Xiaoshi will not leave this person in the sect. That will only give us a reason to attack them. The best way is to send this person out of the sect. In that way, if we coincidentally meet a ferocious monster, not only will we be able to destroy our plan, we will also be able to get rid of the responsibility." She quickly combed through the information and believed that she was right. She raised her head and said, "Find all the people in the clan who are good at the Yang divination art. Quickly find this person's whereabouts. Even if there is only a corpse left, find him." After receiving the order, the elder immediately went to make arrangements. The Yang divination art was a secret technique unique to Madame Ling. It could use the clothes, hair, blood, and many other old things left behind to prepare to find the specific whereabouts of a person. However, Han Dingyi was not a true descendant of a large clan. He was a pure Taoist cultivator. Because his body was a precious raft to cross the world, he was especially tight. In these 2 years, he did not leave anything behind except some used clothes. In the end, Madame Ling could only rely on these things to calculate his whereabouts. Unexpectedly, one of them died on the spot just now using the secret technique. As a Taoist cultivator, Han Dingyi's whereabouts could not be easily calculated. In this aspect, he was comparable to a blood descendant who had opened his fate realm. However, Madame Ling did not know this, so she suffered a great loss. Since this was the only way to find him, Elder Ming could no longer care about this. Under his orders, a dozen or so experts who were proficient in this art were killed in succession. Only then did he find out that he was fleeing towards the south. He immediately sent a few experts in the clan who were proficient in flying to capture him. Han Dingyi flew all the way. As there was no spiritual opportunity in the world, he had to land every few hours. He then used half a day to replenish his mana with the jade sand seeds. After running for more than 30 days, he was almost at the edge of the blood sect's territory. In about 3 to 4 days, he would be out of the sect's territory. It would be convenient for him to go anywhere. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt something strange. Looking back, he saw a red-beaked bird appear in his field of vision. It was flying at an extremely fast speed. He compared the speed of the two and knew that if he did not get rid of the person behind him, he would not be able to leave safely. So he stopped. The bird also slowly changed. Its feathers retracted and its beak shrunk. Finally, it turned into a man with a cold face. However, his body was full of accessories, and he was wearing a strange brocade robe. Han Dingyi's expression froze. When he went to the scripture pavilion, he found out that other than the secret technique, the blood sect also had various kinds of armors, accessories, and weapons that were similar to celestial tools. These were called blood tools. These things were usually taken from the bodies of gods and monsters with similar bloodlines. When used with the owner, their strength would be more than doubled. However, although he did not have these things, he still had the celestial tools with him, so he was not much weaker. He took a deep breath and was about to fight. Suddenly, the man's body stiffened. Then, his eyes rolled, and he fell from the sky, crashing into the sea below. Han Dingyi was stunned and immediately looked down. Just now, he clearly felt a very weak fluctuation of spiritual opportunity from this person. Chapter 18:18. Ever since Han Dingyi arrived at this place, he didn't see any spiritual vigor. Now that he suddenly appeared, there was only one possibility. It was most likely that a fellow Taoist had arrived here. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel excited. He looked down and saw that the pursuer was dead. Just as he was about to examine the cause of his death, he suddenly felt a gust of cold wind and a devil appeared outside. The devil nodded at him and flew off in a certain direction. His heart stirred, and he immediately used his escape light to follow them. After traveling for a few days, they arrived at an island. The devil flew into a cave. Without any hesitation, he followed them in. As soon as he entered the room, he saw a bright pearl hanging from the ceiling. There were 3 people sitting there, all dressed in Taoist robes. One look and you could tell that they were Taoist cultivators, and the one in the middle was clearly a nascent soul-perfected master. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and bowed, saying, Han Dingyi greets fellow Taoists. The Yuanian cultivator among them didn't take it too seriously because of the difference in cultivation. He also bowed, Qinsang School Shi Zhou. Han Dingyi said, so it's Shinran from the upper sect. Shi Zhou said politely, I don't deserve this title. He knew Han Dingyi's identity. Not to mention that his great-grandfather was a disciple of the Shenyuan faction, his ancestor Han Xiaoda was the current Blue Feather sect master and Grotto Heaven's Shinran. He couldn't treat him as a lowly disciple of a lower sect. He pointed at the other 2 and said, this is Lu Huan from the North Star sect. This is Gao Jianfeng from the Dark Yin Heavenly Palace. Han Dingyi hurriedly greeted the 2 of them, then turned to Gao Jian and said, I still have to thank fellow Taoist Gao for lending a hand just now. Gao Jianfeng said, it's nothing. Lu Huan smiled, Taoist Gao has set up demons at the Li Mingxue sect and the Tan clan. We sensed it the moment you came out, but we didn't know where you were going. To be safe, we didn't come to contact you. Han Dingyi nodded, I see. He looked at the 3 of them and said, why are you all here? If it was just for him, there was no need to make such a big fuss. There must be a purpose. Shi Zhou made an inviting gesture and said, fellow Taoist Han, please take a seat. Han Dingyi stood there without moving instead, and he said solemnly, fellow Taoists, I'm afraid you're unaware, but I snuck out from the Mythic Blood sect in secret this time. I feel that I didn't leave any traces behind, yet someone just happened to be able to catch up to me. It's very likely that the sect has a method to find me, and perhaps others will come here in a while. So, why don't we leave this place as soon as possible? Shi Zhou smiled and said, it's fine. I've set up a restriction around this place. Even if they find the door, they won't be able to enter. Gao Jianfeng said, don't worry, fellow Taoist. If it's still the same people as it is now, there's no need to be afraid no matter how many come. Han Dingyi looked around and found that there were indeed a few array flags. What was different was that there seemed to be an endless stream of spiritual vigor gushing out from below. It was obvious that Shi Zhou had brought some powerful instrument. Han Dingyi then felt relieved and sat down at the side. Shi Zhou said, "Exalted Honorable Zhang has deduced that there seems to be a mighty person behind this world. This person has repeatedly stirred up trouble in Bushu Heaven, and it's also because of this reason that fellow Daoist Han entered this place by mistake last time just now." Speaking up to this point, he paused for a moment. The matter regarding that mighty person will naturally be dealt with by Exalted Honorable Zhang. What we need to do is to establish a foothold here, and then occupy this world. Lu Huayan said, "Fellow Daoist Han has been here for a few years, and you've also cultivated in this sect. I'm sure you have some understanding of this place." Han Dingyi said, "I've indeed investigated a lot of useful information, but it's a pity that I've only been here for a short period of time, and I don't know much about matters involving the upper echelons." He fumbled around for a while, and took out a jade scroll, saying, "When I left the sect, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to escape, so I copied a lot of my knowledge into this scroll. I originally planned to leave this for my fellow Taoists, but it seems like there's no need for it now." Shi Zhou said, "Can I have a look?" Han Dingyi extended his hand outwards, and said, "Jinren, please." Shi Zhou took it in his hand, and with a turn of his consciousness, he already understood everything. He then passed it to Gao Jianfeng and Lu Huayan. After both of them had taken a look, he said, "Fellow Taoists, what do you think?" Gao Jianfeng said, "From the looks of it, those who have awakened only rely on their bloodline, and not all of them can fly. It shouldn't be difficult to deal with them, but there's no reference for those above, so it's hard to judge." Lu Huayan said, "There's no spiritual opportunity here, and that's not beneficial to me." Shi Zhou said, "In fact, it's beneficial to me. Items with spiritual opportunity are the same for all things. Since we can use it, then the people of this world can also use it. Those who have transcended into sainthood may even use it as a means to increase their strength. Moreover, from the jade sand seed in fellow Daoist Han's hand, it's not like there's no spiritual opportunity in this world, it's just that it's extremely difficult for ordinary people to obtain it." Lu Huayan nodded, "That's possible." Shi Zhou said, "Our strength is still not enough, so we need to lie low. When more people of the upper realm come here, we can test the depth of this place." Everyone here, including Han Dingyi, nodded. Although there were only a few of them, behind them stood various sects of the human path, and even the entire Busu heaven, so they didn't need to fear any forces here. Han Dingyi pondered for a while, and said, "But we don't know when more people of the same path will come. Instead of sitting and waiting, I can still do something for you." Shi Zhou said, "Fellow Daoist, do you have any brilliant ideas?" Han Dingyi said, "Here in Xionglu, there are 6 major sects, and the blood sect is only one of them. There's also a branch of the dragon sect. My bloodline has been mistaken as a dragon's bloodline. If I go to the dragon sect, I might be able to get more useful information." Lu Huayan said, "But you're not a true dragon after all, you might be exposed." Han Dingyi said, "Don't worry, my sect's secret technique allows me to transform into a true dragon, so there won't be any flaws." Shi Zhou said, "Fellow Daoist, are you sure you want to do this?" Han Dingyi nodded forcefully. Seeing his firm attitude, Shi Zhou knew it would be difficult to persuade him. He thought for a while, and said, "Since fellow Daoist Han is confident, then go and try. If anything happens, I'll take responsibility." Han Dingyi bowed, "Thank you, Jinren Shi." At this moment, Shi Zhou suddenly looked outside. When the 3 of them saw him like this, they also looked out and saw an enormous 3-headed heron circling outside the island. Its body was emitting an astonishing scorching feeling. The rocks on the island were scalding, the plants were scorched, and even the surrounding seawater was giving off steam. Just the power of this kind of divine ability was not something cultivators below the core formation stage could handle. He said, "Fellow Daoist Han, looks like your speculation is correct. Within the blood sect, there is indeed someone who wants to make a fuss about you. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent someone of this level." Shi Zhou stood up from his seat and said, "Let's go and meet the people here and see how they are different from us cultivators." When he finished speaking, he leaped into the light and flew outside. The three could only see rays of light colliding and flickering. It was extremely dazzling, and they didn't dare to look too long. After a dozen breaths, they felt the light recede. It was Shi Zhou who had returned to the cave dwelling. His aura was not damaged at all. With a shake of his sleeve, a middle-aged man tumbled out. In Xianyuan heaven, Zhang Yan was sitting on a jade couch, five-colored splendor illuminating the sky. To prevent the people behind him from causing trouble, he relied on the endless Weili he had borrowed from Buxu heaven to probe that part of the world. At this moment, a divine light flashed in his eyes. He had already sensed that someone had broken through to the Yuanying stage. He could now send cultivators of a higher realm into that place. However, entering the Yuanying stage through the core transformation stage was easy. As long as one was well prepared, breaking through would not be very difficult. But to enter the Grotto Heaven stage was not so simple. It depended on one's luck, as well as one's cultivation and temperament. Even in the upper three halls, it might not be possible, let alone in the heavenly realm where he did not know the details. But there was no need for him to do so. As long as it was a creature of the same level, it could be used as an anchor. It did not necessarily have to be a cultivator. Take the mountain and sea realm for example. In addition to the many ferocious beasts, there were also mystic cultivators. These people focused on qi and blood. Although they also needed some spiritual opportunity, it was not something they could rely on. He only needed to send a mystic cultivator at the spirit manifestation stage to this place. It would be best if he was about to enter the mystic enlightenment stage. If he could break through there, then he could bring in his peers. As for further down, he did not intend to send a mortal metamorphosis cultivator. Instead, he would directly send Peng Xiang and the other Genin demon. If everything went smoothly, then the matter would be settled in a year at most. After he made up his mind, he sent an order. After the Qinsong school received his order, it immediately sent a letter to the 100 nations of the eastern wastelands. Within a few days, two spiritualized mystic cultivators who were about to break through to the next realm came to Yutsong's sect. One of them was Gong Qi, and the other was Mo Wan. When they arrived at the sect through the transportation formation, someone immediately gave them instructions. In just a day, the two of them had already made their preparations. At this moment, they saw a light screen rising in front of them. Knowing that it was where they were going, they immediately walked in. Their minds were in a trance, and they discovered that they had already arrived at an unfamiliar place. When the two of them arrived, they found that it was difficult to circulate their aura. However, the power of their qi and blood became more and more vigorous. It took a while for it to stabilize. The two of them discussed for a while and decided not to contact Shi Zhou and the others for the time being. They would first find a place to cultivate in seclusion, and when they had a breakthrough, they would talk about other things. In the Ling tribe's cave, a three-eyed green-skinned giant was half submerged in a warm spring. The woman was standing in front of him, muttering something. After a while, she turned around and said, "Have you found the person?" The elder lowered his head and reported, "Mistress, I'm useless. Just now, I've received news that the people who went to chase after the person have not returned. It seems that they are lost outside. It seems that this person has help from behind." The woman said coldly, "You don't have to worry about it. This time, I'm going to use the green demon to get this person back." The elder was shocked and said with a trembling voice, "Mistress, if we touch the green demon, it's very likely that we'll attract those extraterrestrial monsters. I'm afraid the sect won't allow it." The woman waved her hand and interrupted him, "I've already made up my mind. There's no need to say more. Moreover, the green demon will only go for a round outside this time. It'll be fine." The elder saw the ferocious expression on her face. His lips moved, but he still couldn't say anything. He only lowered his head and felt very uneasy. He murmured, "I hope it's fine." You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.